Hi, welcome to a new SimplyMaya tutorial. Now, I was recently tasked with rendering an interior scene, and for that I had to create some props, some set dressing if you will. One of which was this rather handsome bonsai tree in pot here with sculpted rock. So I wanted to make this into a tutorial for several reasons. It's a very good technique for creating trees, whether they be big or small, bonsai or otherwise. It's one of those things that uses a lot of paint effects that are perhaps overlooked by some people, so we'll be using collision objects in paint effects, we'll be using line modifiers in paint effects, basically everything you need to create this tree and very complicated root structure down here, while still giving us the ability to create more than one. So as a piece of set dressing, you might be dressing a florist, something like this, somebody's living room that has several of these trees, and I wanted to come up with some techniques that will allow you to create more than one specific type of tree. So we'll start off for this tutorial by looking at some basic paint effects and how to manipulate those paint effects to get curves, to get this sort of sculpted look to the top of the tree, all that sort of stuff. We'll then be looking at some basic sculpting in Maya to create this rock structure here that all the roots are sitting in. Finally, we'll finish off with a pot. We'll also look at setting up some test render environments, because what you see here in the display is in the viewport is often quite different to what you're actually going to get. So we'll set up a test render environment like this one so we can take a look at our leaves, and if we go to the second picture here, you'll see some more detailing on that sculpted rock, and finally a third image with much bigger leaf images. It's very flexible as to what type of leaf you would have, what type of branching you would have, what type of root structure you would have. So I've tried to create, in this case, a bonsai tree, but a method of having to do many of them at the same time. So if you were tasked with, say, creating 25 bonsai trees, you wouldn't necessarily want to go in and sculpt those all by hand. So this method will allow you to create a variety of different trees, different tree shapes, different trunks, different root systems, all of that sort of business, without the need to actually jump into an application like ZBrush and start sculpting away. So one thing I would say is we don't take too much of a look at texturing in this particular chapter, because the paint effects themselves, after we've converted them to polygons, of course, come in with their UVs intact. So texturing this for a prop, especially for a background kind of prop, it's just a case of banging a bark texture on and some bump mapping. Now if you wanted to turn this into a hero object, if you were really shooting it from a really close-up distance, like this for instance, and it was the main focus of your shot, then obviously you'd want a little displacement or something on here. Some surface detailing with ZBrush or Mudbox at that point could come in handy, and indeed if there's enough interest in this tutorial and enough people would like to see it, I'll continue with this and do some probably Mudbox surface detailing and then some hand painted textures for this kind of object. So this was a very fun one to do, and I hope you join me for this one, and I'll see you in the first part. Thank you very much for watching. Hi, welcome back. So now we've had a chance to have a look at the finished product, I just want to go over some reference really quickly before we get started, just to some of the thought processes of why this tree came about looking the way it did. So if I open up my types of bonsai tree here, we've got several different ones, and a lot of these are not actually one tree, these ones quite obviously, but some of these ones are several trees forced together, grown over a period of time. So there is some challenges here, especially with the very twisty trunks and whatnot, and also we have to pick a style of bonsai. Now I quite like this broom one, because for me I was doing a tree that would be shot at quite some distance. It was actually a prop for an interior scene I'll be making, so a lot of this tiny detail would be lost at distance. So I really like this kind of big, very tree-like. When I imagine a tree, that's kind of the shape I imagine it in, so I quite like that. But I didn't want to do a straight trunk with no roots at the bottom. I wanted to incorporate several different elements of various styles of bonsai, because it will make for a much more interesting tutorial. So if we look through the reference, you can see here we've got one of those broom style, just branch straight up, lovely shape to it. And if we continue through, there's another example. I really like this shape. And I really like this big root structure on rocks, so we're going to have a play around with creating a big root structure. Again, a bigger root structure on rocks, which I really like. And I really liked the way some of these bend and kink, so we'll be adding some of that as well. And I like the small leaves we've got here. So we'll be incorporating elements from several different bonsai trees. Now, before we get started, let's just create a project. Now, I've already done mine, but if you want to do yours, you have to go to project window, hit new, give it a location, and hit accept. This will create all of the directories that you need when we start swapping data backwards and forwards. It's also very good practice. It will keep all your files in good working order, so you know where everything is. Okay. Right, without any further ado, let's get in and create the base of our tree. So I'm going to go up to Window and General Editors, Content Browser. Now, if you're on an older copy of Maya, that will be under Window Visor, I believe. So this opens my Paint Effects strokes, which you can find under Paint Effects, and we're under Trees Mesh. Now, if you don't have these examples, you can go ahead and download them from Autodesk website. I think starting with Maya 2017, they included these examples as an additional download. It's free of charge, and you can just drop off to the website and grab it. I'll include a link in the README file that comes along with this tutorial. So we're going to start with this oak leafy medium. Now, technically it doesn't really matter as long as you start with the base mesh tree. We're going to be changing this so much that really we could use maple birch, but I've found for what I'm creating here that this oak is not a bad starting point. And if you've never played with these Paint Effects strokes, then I really do encourage you to go in and just lay down one of each, have a look what they look like, and see what's the best starting point for you. But for us, this oak will do. So now you'll see I've got a Paint Effects brush. I'm just going to start in the middle and click and drag a stroke out. There we go, we've got a tree. Okay, so as a starting point, it's not bad. It's going to be changed a lot, and you'll see that we've got far too many branches here, and yeah, not that happy with it, but as a start. So I'm going to pull open the outliner so we can get back to our stroke easily. So Window, Outliner, and I'm going to dock mine over here. There we go, just click there, there you go. So this is the Paint Effects stroke we'll be editing, and if we go up to the stroke itself, so oak leafy medium, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff here that we can change. Now, a lot of it is going to be irrelevant to us. So things like the shading, texturing, illumination, shadow effects, and glow, these are all to do with Maya's old render engine. Now, we'll be using Arnold to eventually render this, so none of this is going to be of any use to us at all. This would be for rendering a Paint Effects stroke, and we're actually going to be converting to geometry and rendering that. So none of this is any use to you. Where most of the action happens is under tubes and creation, growth, behavior. So creation would be the initial creation of the tubes. You've got things like its standard attributes for length, its width, its scale of width, meaning it starts fatter out down here and gets thinner as it goes up, or in this case it starts fatter at the bottom, gets thinner, and then gets fatter, and then thinner, and then fatter, and then finally really thin towards the top. We've got growth, where you can turn on branches, leaves, twigs, flowers, and buds, and again the menus to control that. And behavior would be the forces really applied to this. So for instance, if we go into forces and go down to gravity, if I put more gravity on this, you'll see exactly what you would expect to happen. Okay, now generally I like to come in here and reset most of these values before we start. So first things first though, I just want to check out how many segments we have and that we're on mesh. Let's make sure, well, brush type is mesh. Now if you'd have gone to trees that don't say mesh and used one of these, you can easily convert that to a mesh tree by just coming up here and going brush type from paint to mesh. Okay. Now if we look under the mesh settings, you'll see my tube sections are 12. Now this is generally okay. If I increase those, you'll see we get more geometry, which you might be tempted to do because this is a bit chunky. It's not very round, so you might think I'll just increase my tube sections. But that will also increase the tube sections along all these tiny branches as well. So you'll end up with a massive amount of polys. It's genuinely better to, or generally better, to leave it a low poly to start with, and then when we convert it to a mesh, we can select specific pieces to convert to higher resolution. So this is fine at the moment. Really don't need to do a lot in there. Now, shading, texturing, illumination, shadow, and glow, again, no good to us. And segments here under creation will also affect our mesh. So I'm going to leave mine at around 18, should do it. And we can come back in and tweak that later. And you'll see that's had some effect on our tree. Now, the other thing is the scale. It's tiny at the moment. I believe I'm in a 1 centimeter scale, so this is 1 centimeter across. And while I don't really need it in real size right now, in real world units, I don't like to work at this scale because clipping can become an issue when you try and zoom in and whatnot. So let's just change this to a global scale of, I don't know, 50 should do it. So we're not working on a tree for ants. Alright, so that gets us, some of the basic settings. One of the first things I'm going to do under the tubes, under growth, we're going to turn off the leaves. We don't need to be seeing that right now. And if I come in and turn off the twigs, which you would expect to be the little twigs, you'll see that everything disappears. This is because if we look at branches and then we look at twigs, under twigs we've got branch after twigs, which basically means that the twigs will become the main branches and the branches will become the twigs. Now, there is method to this madness. It's because we have more control over twigs than we do of branches. So if we use the twigs to create the main branches, we'll have more control over our shaping. Now, you can also see here that our trunk is really kind of weird. This is because of the forces that are applied to it. So we will eventually need some of these forces, but for right now, when we're doing our base setup, let's go ahead and turn most of these forces off. So I'm going to leave a little bit of gravity. I'm going to take some random out. Deflection will deal with if a branch hits the floor, how it's deflected off there, so we don't need to worry about that so much for now. Turbulence is off, spiral is off, bend is off. Okay, so most of our forces are off. Let's look under displacement, and we've got a lot of curl in there, which is what's creating that sort of crazy pattern. So let's turn most of that off. And what else have we got on? Nothing. The noise frequency won't affect anything at the moment because we have no noise. Again, wiggle frequency won't affect anything because we have no wiggle. And basically we've got a bit of random and a bit of gravity, which should be fine for now. Okay, so that just resets us a bit more to default. Let's turn the twigs back on. Okay, now we want a much longer trunk than this, so there's several ways to do that. One, we can put the twig star up towards the top of the tree. So let's go ahead and do that first of all. So twig star, move it up. There we go. And already we are more bushed out than we were before. Now we can also affect the length of this trunk by coming up here and using the length min and max. So if I increase the max length, what you would expect to happen, the maximum length of the tree increases. We can then come down and change the angle on these things. So split angle, you'll see this one does for the branches. Now we want ours in a fairly neat sort of pattern. And twig, let's see here, twig angles. Okay, so this one will move basically the ones at the bottom and this one the ones at the top. So we want to keep ours a bit neat. Now it's a bit lopsided, this tree. It's got not many branches on this side and it's got quite a few on that side. So to deal with that, we can use the twist attributes. So split twist will split how the branches twist, and twist here will twist the twigs. And now remember that the twigs are actually the big branch things. I know it's a bit confusing, but let's see, twig twist, there we are. So we can twist these out until we get a more circular pattern on this. So if I look from the top, That's about right now. Okay, and I want this a bit more up. So let's again go to the angle and okay, now we're talking. Now we've got a better looking starting point. Now we can of course increase the number of twigs. You want to be a bit careful with that because you can go extremely high poly here. So let's just dump it down to there, and we can of course increase the number of branches. So there we go. Now that's the wrong one. Now you'll see here we've got a split max depth, which will determine where at which depth the branch is split out from the tree. So down here at this very low value we're getting almost no branch split out, and up here we're getting a ton of branch split out. Now, one of the difficult things with this is, and let's also change the twig length because I would like this a bit further down, which will have an effect on our split max depth. So, all of these things tend to be connected to each other, so you can end up spending quite a long time playing with these values. But let's just decrease the twig length a bit. There we go. Now, we've got sort of the basic shape already. We can come in again and play with this bottom angle here to fill it out a bit more. Well, there's also a whole bunch of modifiers that we can use. One of the nice things to do here is to use more twigs and then increase the twig dropout to give us a much more random kind of feel to it. And again, the same thing can be done with branches with dropout. So we can drop out far more branches, and increasing the number of branches and twigs and then using the dropout tends to give you a much more random feel to your tree. So let's go ahead and put some leaves on this. Okay, now I've got my leaves and I'm getting pretty close to what it is I wanted. Now we haven't quite got that sculpted look we need yet. And our leaves are either far too big or far too small, depending on how you're going to do it. So if you're going to use one leaf card here and put one leaf image on it, we want that extremely small leaf look. So you would need many more of these. The other way to do it is to use a much bigger leaf card with lots of individual leaves painted on it, and then use opacity to cut those out. So that's probably the way we're going to do here. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. The advantages to big leaf cards is you get a lot lower poly. The disadvantages is you'll be dealing with a lot of levels of opacity. But with a renderer like Arnold, that's not really a huge thing. So let's go ahead and, before we do anything else, go and look at our leaf settings, because there's quite a lot of settings in leaves. So leaves in a cluster, number of leaves, leaf dropout, again, better to have more and drop certain leaves out. And you'll also see we're getting some leaves on our trunk here. So let's go down and on secondary branches only, and they'll disappear, because we don't really want to be dealing with those. Okay, so we will probably, when we have bigger leaves, need some segments to our leaves so we can bend them down to our liking, and get different angles on them, places where they start. But for me, I find at this point what we see in the viewport is often very different, because in the viewport this looks like a great big bushy tree, but I think you'll find when we start to render this that because there's so many gaps in it, what we'll see is very few leaves and a lot of branches. So I'm going to leave this part here. We've got our basic shape, and we're going to come back in the next part and set up a very quick test render platform, because we'll need to go through some test renders for this, because as I say, what you're seeing here is not necessarily anything like what you're going to get at render time. So I'll be back in the next part when we'll set up a quick render and continue to work on our tree. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found something interesting in here. Okay, welcome back. So we finished off here, and we need a test render platform now to see what we're actually dealing with when we render this tree. Now, in order to render this, we're going to be using Arnold, which won't render paint effects natively, but that's not such a problem. We can convert this to polygons. Now, converting to polygons won't destroy the connection with the paint effect. So even after we convert to polys, the polys will update automatically when we change the paint effect. So we don't need to worry about converting to polys, then deleting that, then changing, then the process isn't ongoing. We can convert to polys and have it update automatically. So let's go up to edit and where are we? Create, modify. I forgot where it was now. I've only been using Maya for 20 years. But anyway, convert paint effects to polygons. There we go. And I'll pop open the options menu and reset it. So it starts off like this. You've got 100,000 poly limit and you've got hide stroke, which will hide the paint effect stroke, which is a good thing for us. But I don't want a poly limit. I can deal with any issues that come up with too high polygons later on, and I want it outputted as quads. So fairly simple. 0 just means no limit. Let's convert that to a mesh, to geometry, and as you can see here, we've got geometry. So let's set up a test render platform. So come in and get a polygon plane, just so we've got some reference for the floor. And as we unit Arnold, I'm just going to go to Arnold Lights. Let's just use a sky dome for now, just to give us some overall illumination. Clip the intensity of that a little bit, and create one directional light as well to give us some light direction. So let's come in and light directional. There we go, and scale that. Again, I'm sure most of you will know, but the scale and placement of a directional light doesn't really do anything because this is an infinite light. So scaling it won't increase the intensity. The only reason I do it is because it gives me an easier way to see which direction the light is pointing in. So in this case, the light would come straight from there, which is not very sun-like. So let's point it down. Now we've got light going in this direction, of course, and let's just have it hit at a slightly oblique angle because it will make for a slightly more interesting render. So I'm going to turn on the resolution gate so we can see the resolution we're working at, but for me this is a bit much grey, so what I normally do is come in here and under, let's see, where is it? I'll probably scale past it. Display options, there we go. So overscan, set it to 1, maybe 1.05. So now we have less overscan, so I'm not losing all that screen space. Okay, now let's get a render of this, and I don't think it's going to look quite as bushy as you see it here. So I'm going to pop open the render view, which is opened on my second monitor, and hit go. Now, it's actually not terrible at this point. We've got kind of the look we're going for. We're a little bit missing out of here, but that's okay. We'll fix that in a second. And these leaves for me are a little too big. I want to go with that very, very small leaf look. But I kind of like the branching up from the center. And the trunk, we'll deal with that in a second. But yeah, not too bad for a start. Actually quite surprised that it looked that good. But let's go in and have a play with these leaves and put our leaf images on them. So I'm going to come in here and go to the material attributes, the leaf, and you'll see at the moment is linked to just Maya's standard paint effects shader. So before we can get into placing leaf images, I'm going to bookmark this camera view as well, just so we can come back to it for consistency. So if you've never done that before, it's here for the bookmark, left click and then right click. You'll see I've got a camera 1 bookmark there. So if I right click, I can just go back to it. Okay, so let's do a leaf card strategy, which means getting rid of a lot of these leaves, and instead of having individual leaves, we'll put big leaf cards in there, and that will become more apparent in a second. So back to our paint effect stroke. Under the stroke itself, they come in and go to its tubes, which is where all the main action happens, growth, leaves, and now leaves in cluster. We're going to do number of leaf clusters 1. We just want 1 leaf, and you'll see we've got a straight leaf coming off the end here. That will be the terminal leaf. So if we go down, let's turn that off for now. We might reintroduce it, probably won't have to, but And you'll see my leaves are all starting back here, and now I appear to have a completely unpopulated tree almost of leaves. So let's change the leaf start. So leaf start, there we go, and let's move them all towards the end. There we go. So now we can see there's just one leaf in each cluster here. So that's no good for us. Let's make 4 leaves per cluster. And let's get a good one over here. Okay, so they're all like this. Let's change the leaf angle so they're in a square. There we go. Done. Okay, and now they're a bit small, and they have no segments, so they're very square, but let's not worry about that too much just yet. Let's just make them a bit bigger. So leaf size, let's go 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. There we go. Now we should see much better. So now we've got this sort of big leaf card pattern. Let's go back to our camera view. Okay, let's see what this looks like when rendered. Okay, so I'm going to save this and re-render. I'm always going to save one so we have some comparison to come back to. Okay, so that's the comparison between many individual leaves and big leaf cards. Now, we can't really judge these leaf cards at the moment because they have no opacity on them. So let's go and fix that. We're also going to use a different texture to Maya's standard one, so we'll have a look at that. Let's go to Assign New Material, and let's throw an AI standard material on this. Now, if you're still using Maya 2016, you're going to want to do this with probably the arc material and cut out opacity, basically. So not too different to what we're going to do here. Now we need to scroll down, and under refraction you'll see we've got an opacity here. Now you don't want to make this, you need to make it opaque, because if we were to give it a refraction weight or something like this, try and make it transparent, specular would still apply to the bits that were transparent. So we need complete opacity, which again, Mental Ray is cut out opacity and Arnold is opacity here. So let's go ahead and take a look at a texture. So I've got a sample leaf texture here, and as you can see, it's basically a picture of many small leaves. Now, if you're on our streaming platform here at SimplyMaya, under the Spack-Arlsberg house and I believe the realistic outdoor environments, I go through quite a process of creating leaves and leaf cards within Photoshop. So I'm not going to do it again, but basically for most of you guys, I'm sure will know Photoshop. So you just get a picture of leaves, you go out with the camera, take a picture of some leaves, and cut it out. So you end up with the leaves and an alpha for the leaves. So we'll be using both of these. So let's open this, and I believe this was under opacity, so of course we want the alpha. And because it's an alpha image, we don't want gamma correction, so we're going to come up and set this to raw. And then we'll go back, and that will be our opacity. Now you don't need to change the weight of refraction. We're not actually doing a refraction at the moment, we're just doing an opacity, so this weight can stay at 0. And then under our color, of course, we're going to want the color map for that. So leaves. There we go. Now this color space will be left to sRGB. Maya has color correction on by default after 2016, so we need to correct these to sRGB, whereas with a bump map, a displacement map, or in our case a opacity map, we would leave that to raw, or we would set that to raw. Sorry. But anyway, let's get a look at this now. Let's kidnap this one and go again. Now this is probably going to take a little bit longer to render because now it's working out certain levels of opacity, and you can see here that nothing happened. We have no opacity here. This is down to a property of Arnold. Because most objects are opaque, they're solid, they're not going to let light through. Arnold by default says everything is set that way. It helps speed up the render. So if you have something where you are using opacity, you actually have to click onto the mesh, go to Arnold and turn off opaque, because in this case it won't be. And let's do another render of this. Now we're going to take some extra time because it's not rendering everything completely opaque, but it should be fairly quick. Okay, so as you can see, using those big leaf cards, even though we've used big leaf cards, you can see tiny leaves. And this is the look I was going for. This gives us a slight problem because now we've got more of this structure exposed, which I didn't really want, but we can come in and fix that. I just want to get another render here with the light coming a bit more forward so we can see a bit more detail in these. So let's get this light here. Now we've got our camera angle bookmarked, and let's go here and push that light a bit further forward, go back to our bookmark and re-render. Now it is fairly essential to do these test renders. I'm doing them here so you guys won't have to at home if you're just following along, but you know, the look of a Paint Effects tree in the viewport is going to be vastly different than the look you get at render time, especially when you start playing with big leaf cards and whatnot. Okay, so now I can see a little more detail here in my leaves. Just wanted to get that light a bit further forward for, you know, future test renderings. Now we do need to sort out the shape of this a bit, and we don't really have enough leaves, but part of that is probably because they're so stiff. Another thing we might have to deal with, if we come in and look at the alpha channel here, actually it's not bad at the moment, but we probably don't have enough levels of opacity for this. So enough levels of transparency, if you like. So if we go into the Arnold render settings itself, and I will keep that. And this has to do with the fact that by default, Arnold has 10 rays for transparency. So it passes through one, that's one ray, it passes through another, that's two, it passes through a third, that's three. And as we're going to be dealing with a lot of these cards, by the time the light goes from here all the way through to here, if it's pass through more than 10 of these cards, it's just going to stop, it's just going to ignore, the transparency at that point. So if we go into the render settings here and under Arnold render, let's go to ray depth and increase the transparency depth from 10 to 20. Now this will increase render time, but Arnold is pretty quick with this, so I would say we would go from, what are we at now, not very long, 30 seconds to maybe 50 seconds. It's acceptable to me for a good test render. So let's come in here and kidnap that and do this again with the increased ray depth. You probably won't see a huge amount of difference. It'll become more important later on when we start to add more leaves, but for right now let's just do a quick comparison. Okay, that rendered in, and if I flick backwards and forwards you'll see a slight difference. If you pay attention to this area and this area here, as I flick through, you'll see that's a lot darker. Well, that's where we run out of opacity, and that's going to transparency, if you like. That's going to make a bit of a difference to the alpha channel. So look at this one and then this one. You can see, especially around the edges here. So if we tried to composite this one with only 10 levels, we'd run into a bit of an issue. So it's something to bear in mind, and our render time went from surprisingly quick, 31 seconds, to 38 seconds. So, you know, not much of a difference there at all, really. Let's go back to RGB. Now, things we need to sort out. Well, first off, these leaf cards are perhaps a little too small, even. So let's come in, select our stroke, and again, under the stroke, tubes, again, where most of the action happens, growth, leaves. Let's make these leaf cards a little bigger before we do anything else. So leaf size, let's make them 1.5. Now this is quite a juggling act, you know, and this is one of the things that you're going to have to spend time on. So let's just test render this with the bigger leaf cards. Okay, and that's came in, and we're looking a lot bushier now. So if I flip the comparison, you can see what a difference that made to the amount of leaves we have on the tree. And these leaves are still very small. It's got the exact look I'm going for. Now, problem is they still look fairly squarish, and this is going to not really help us when it comes to adding some spec to these. We're going to want a bit more definition. Now, if I look at the poly count at the moment, you'll see we're fairly low poly. We're at 61,500 polys. Now, we've done trees in the past that have gone into 500,000 polys, no problem. So at 61,000, again, it's acceptable to me. I'm not trying to make an extremely low poly tree here. If I was, I'd reduce the number of segments, I'd reduce the number of branches, and I'd use even bigger leaf cards. But for us, you know, this is going to be a bit of a hero tree for this shot, so it can have the extra polygons. Now, I'm getting lots of black in the viewport here because I have two-sided lighting turned on. So let's just do that so it looks nicer and we can see a bit more what we're going for. Now I'm going to change the direction these leaves go in a bit, and to do that I'm going to come in and I'm going to go under branches and I'm going to go to one branch. That will give us substantially less leaves to look at, so when we're changing them we'll be able to change them more in real time. So let's go in and look at our leaf attributes here. And we've got probably a leaf stiffness of 1, and even if we didn't, this won't affect us at all at the moment because these leaves have no geometry for which to change. So let's go in and put 4 leaf segments in, and if we look at them now you can see they've got actual segments, and we're going to just give these a little less stiffness so they kind of droop a little bit, gives them a little bit of shape. And we can also do face sun, which will give them a little bit more randomness. Okay, we're not looking for monstrous changes here, we're just looking to give them a little bit of shape so they're not completely square. Now let's see, we don't really want to use a leaf width scale, so let's come up here and delete all of these so we just have one width for our leaf. And leaf angle we could play with, sorry, the top one's not going to work, just a little bit, just to get us a little more organic feeling, and everything else will be absolutely fine, I should think. Now again, this can take quite some playing with. Let's come in and just turn the leaves off for now, so we can look at these branches here. Let's go back to 2, and we do have like a rogue branch here and not enough branching here. So if we go to branches 3, this will take some time and give us a massive poly count, I'm sure. There we go. We're up to 500,000 polys. So that's fairly unacceptable. Now we could use a big dropout here. You'll see that my viewport here, this is taking quite a long time. So you could use more branches and a higher dropout, which is what I have a tendency to do. 140,000, 83,000, and again you've got to decide how many polys is acceptable to you personally. Let's look at that from our camera view. Okay, so we do have this issue of too much bend here and not enough bend here, which we'll correct in the next part probably. But for right now, let's just try this split angle. So let's put these up a bit more, like so. And let's look at the twigs, and let's try the angles on these. So this one down a bit, and this one also down a bit. We're just trying to spread these out a little bit. Okay, that would be too much because we want that broom shape, or whatever the bonsai we were creating was actually called. And we can use things called line modifiers to modify this a bit later. Let's put the leaves back on, which will probably take some time now. And we've gone to a shape that I'm really not happy with. So again, it gets difficult to tell until you start putting leaves on. So let's go back down to branches 2, because I think in our case we had a fairly nice shape to begin with. So let's come in here. Yeah, and that's looking a bit nicer. Okay, yeah, let's have a render of this from our camera angle. And you know, with this kind of thing, guys, there really isn't a list of settings I can give you. Each of these settings will do something together, so they are combined. So changing the branch dropout will change the look, changing the split angle will change the angles of the leaves as well, of course. So there are so many settings in this that you really are going to have to go with a trial and error approach. Now you can get the big things, the basic shape like this, fairly simply, and then spend an hour or two tweaking settings to get the exact shape you want. But let's do a render of this now. So let's kidnap this one and render this one. Okay, so that's given me slightly more of the shape I was looking for, slightly more towards the straight horizontal look. We've still got a problem with this branch here that needs to go up, but we can actually do that independently, which I'll show you in the next part. But I'm going to leave this here. This is a pretty good starting point for the basic shape of this tree. So when we come back, we'll look at using some line modifiers to bend the trunk slightly out of shape, to push these branches back into place, and we'll probably continue to tweak the shape of this because I think it should be more like this. So we'll bring in, possibly have another look at the reference. Where are we? There we go. So let's look at that one tree, not that one. That one was too wide. Okay, yeah, so we've got this one. Let's have a look at our render. Here we go. Yeah, so we're not that far off. We can look at the length of this and, you know, basically changing the shape of the trunk here because it's a bit boring. I mean, on this type of bonsai, it probably should be straight, but I want to show you some tricks to twisting it about a bit. Okay, so I hope you found something in here that was useful, and I will see you in the next part. Thanks for watching. Okay, welcome back. So we left off here. We're about 90% of the way through getting the look we want. We've just got a few niggling areas. I'd like to bend this trunk out a bit and push this up here. So we're going to look now at the use of modifiers. Now to do this, I'm going to just hide the actual mesh. So Control H to hide the mesh, and I'm going to bring the stroke back. So Shift H to show the paint effect. Now we're looking at the paint effect, and the reason for this will become clear in a moment. It's easier to work with these modifiers on the paint effect than it is on the mesh. Well, that is indeed very possible on the mesh too. So first things first, let's turn the leaves off, because we don't want to be dealing with all of these leaves when we're shaping the branches. Let's come into the stroke itself, go here and turn off the leaves. Okay, now you can see we've got some areas that might need a bit of touch up. So this here is too far down. It's what's causing the hole here in our render, so I want to shove it up there a bit. So if I select the actual paint effect stroke and go to, I need to be under modeling for this, and now on older versions of Maya there used to be an actual paint effects menu. That's been moved to this menu called generate. So if you're on an older version, find the paint effects menu. I can't remember where off the top of my head where it is. I think it's under modeling, but it should be fairly easy to find. It's just one of the menus called paint effects. However, 2017 generate, for whatever reason they decided to do that. But anyway, so create modifier. You'll see here I have a modifier, which if I make it a bit bigger, it's a bit small at the moment, and by default it's going to modify the width. So if I move this modifier about, you can see it modifies the width. So let's bring it out, and it's a spherical modifier. You can change that to a cube if you so desire. I'm going to stay with the sphere, and width scale, we're going to put it to 1. So now this modifier will do absolutely nothing. Now, in order for us to see the effect, or the area of effect the modifier has, I'm going to hit modify color. And that's why we went back to the paint effect, because it won't modify the color of a poly with a texture on it, but it will modify the color of a paint effect. So as I move that, you can see the area of effect it would have. Now, at the moment it has a very large drop off, so if we come up here and make that different, you can see, so having this color armed is very nice to see a live representation of the drop-off. So let's get the branch that we want to move. In this case, this one, I believe. Now, there's several ways to do this, and it's not an exact science, so you might have to bear with me, but I'm going to put this at the tip of the branch, and then I'm going to try and apply some force to this to move it. So let's just come up and increase the drop off, and let's go down to tube attributes and force. So that will move it that way by default, so you can see we are having effect. We also have directional force, which is going to be difficult to see with this here, but you can see there's a little arrow here telling you which direction that directional force is going to. Now as we want to move this up a bit, we would have to rotate this so the directional force is pointing upwards. And there we go. So that moves our branch more back into position. So you can come in and individually edit the location of branches, which is generally not necessary because you'd want a slightly messy tree look. But for something like a bonsai, where you've got this kind of very exacting sort of style, then this is a great way to do that. We can also use a line modifier to kink out this trunk a bit. On this style bonsai, for you bonsai aficionados, please don't write to me and tell me I've got the angle wrong. I'm simply doing this to demonstrate some techniques, and I know that this style bonsai generally has a straight trunk, but I quite like the kinked trunk, so I'm going to do that. Now let's go up again to generate, and we want create modifier. There we go, and you'll see it's come in the middle there. And by default, once again, it will modify the width. So let's turn that off. And what we want is something that will kink out the trunk just a little bit. I'm not going to go extreme here, guys, but let's turn on the modify color so we can see, and let's go for some force. So that's going to kink it out that way a bit. And then I'm going to create another one to stand it back up straight nearer the top. So generate and create modifier. Oh, whoops, you need to select the paint effect stroke before you do that. Create modifier. And again, let's just set the width to 1. And pull this one up here. Make it a little bigger. Have it affect the color. So just, I mean, this is just a visual representation for us. It's not really important for anything else because we won't, as I've said, be rendering the paint effects color. And let's apply some force, and that will probably kink it back the other way. There we go. So I do want this to stand up straight. So force, force, force. Where are you? Okay, we're going to need a bit more. 1.2 maybe. 1.3. Yeah, getting pretty happy with that. 1.4. Okay, yeah, that's back in a position where I quite like it. So now we've got a kinked out trunk. We've fixed the location of some of these branches, and now we're going to need to do a render. So I'm going to hide the paint effect stroke, Control H, and bring back the mesh, which you'll see has been, so Shift H, which you'll see has been automatically updated. Now I'm also going to get a new render view here because I really want to see the effect of that kinked trunk. So let's change the light accordingly. And we'll get it coming sort of from that angle, so front and slightly sideways. There we go. Now I'll also bookmark this. Okay, just so we have a camera view to come back to. So camera view 2, and let's go ahead and put the leaves back on. So the stroke, leaves, leaves, leaves. There we go. Let's put the leaves back on. And ooh, we are missing a big segment of leaves over there. But again, that can be dealt with by modifiers. It's probably just a branch that's dropped out there. So let's get a good angle for this so you can see it from. And of course, depending on what you're doing with your bonsai tree, it might not need to be perfect the entire way around. I'm going to make mine, I'm going to fill this hole in, but I shall probably do that in between the parts because I'm going to do it the same way we've been doing everything here. So let's just get a good render angle on this, lights in the right direction, and let's do a render. Let's kidnap that one. Okay, so I've got my slightly kinked trunk, and I don't have the big sort of branch hole here anymore, although I do have some holes on the back side. So let's come in and take a look at that. Now this tree is also appearing to be leaning a little bit that way, which I'm not keen on. So let's go to the stroke and use something we haven't used yet, which is under creation. And this would be the, we can change this. Oh, yep, that's the problem you have when you have all the leaves on it too. So we can alter that ever so slightly. And we could also change the elevation of the tree here, which will, do this. But I'm quite happy with its elevation. Okay, so we have a few bits to sort out. One being this ginormous hole we have here. So again, under tubes, and let's turn the leaves off so we're not having to deal with all those polys, and look at the reason why we've got this ginormous hole. So we could use a force modifier to push this over. Let's look at the branch dropout for a start and see if no, we don't need that many twigs. This will be because it's a main one. So let's look at the twig dropout and see if another twig appears in there. It does, but again, that's probably too many twigs. So instead of that, let's look at the twig twist. Okay, no, not what I'm looking for, because that's not the twig twist, that's the twig angle. And you want to move these around so you don't have an obvious hole anywhere now. Okay, could use a modifier here to force these branches down, which I think I'll do. But to be honest, at this point we're just going to make some small tweaks in here. This can be quite a time-consuming process, to get these things exactly where you want them. So again, I wanted that one up a bit. Of course, when you move your tree, you're going to move all your modifiers as well. It's going to move in relation to your placed modifiers, sorry. So you might have to end up coming in and tweaking those a bit. There we go, that's what I wanted, that up there. Okay, so for right now, I'm pretty happy with where we are so far. Let's put the leaves back on. Under the stroke, of course. So let's put those leaves back on. Grab a test render. And as I say, I'm pretty happy. What needs to be done now is basically a bunch of fine tuning. So I'm going to do that off camera because it's nothing that I haven't already covered. So I might use a few more of those force modifiers. And before I go, there's one other trick with those that I want to show you. And I might, change the angle of the twigs, change the twirl of the twigs, very small tweaks, and a bunch of test rendering to get the look I'm after. So I'm not going to put you through that because it's just a time-consuming process. But what I will do for you is I will save this scene file out now as part 3 end, and I will have a part 3 end 001 or something like that, which will be the final settings that I use for this tree. But it will literally be basically what we have now, with a few very minor tweaks. Just one more trick before we go on to the next part, which will be creating the root system, that I want to show you with these force modifiers. Okay, so I'm really quite liking the look of this now. It's pretty straight along the bottom. And again, it's got a bit of a gap here, but that's easily fixed with a line modifier. Put one in there and apply some force to it, and it will spread the leaves out a bit, which is really all you need to do. We could also drop the leaves, droop them more. And yeah, the trick I wanted to show you before we go. So I'm going to droop the leaves a bit more before we go as well, just so you can see the difference, and then it will just be tiny tweaks. So let's come in and generate a modifier. Now again, we won't bother to hide the paint effect stroke this time because this is going to be a bit obvious what it's doing. I will go in and hide the leaves so we're not dealing with too many polys. And I'm going to scale up this modifier, which you'll see, oops, I've actually scaled up the entire trunk there, and you'll see what this is doing. It's creating more width, which in a sense is no bad thing. It's not something we need. But when I said spread the leaves out a bit more, if you see here, if I take the drop off so it's a bit more extreme width and just apply force to this, let's see, where is it? So let's go in where we'd have a lot of branches like here and just apply force to this. You'll see it spreads those out and moves them a bit. So, that's what I mean by tiny tweaks. You go in and perhaps move this about a bit. But what I wanted to show you was you can also use the displacement to displace it down or forward. And you've got a directional displacement, which will, again, forward or back. So if I put this directional displacement to 10, I'd expect those to go out that way. Sorry, the other way. So depending on which way you move your directional displacement, so -10, and I grow my branches a bit longer. So again, you've got a very great degree of control. But a great thing for this is you can do a branch dropout for pruning. So let's get 100% or 80% branch dropout, and as I move this through, you'll see branches start to drop out. I also have some force applied to it, so let's turn that off. And you can just see I can drop out branches. So if you've got any, maybe it's a little too branchy down here, no problem, I can come in and clip some off. Okay, so you can also do the same with leaf dropout, and so if you have too many leaves. So again, these modifiers give you a great degree of control over your paint effect. Now let's get this for a decent angle, and I'm going to droop the leaves. It's one technique that helps to fill in the gaps a bit. So let's bring the leaves back because we'll need them. So I'm on the wrong thing, stroke. Let's bring the leaves back. And again, I'm dealing with a lot of leaves here. So let's set the number of branches down to 1 so I can just see these leaves. And let's go to leaf, where do we want it? Stiffness, there it is. And let's just droop them a bit. And if we do leaves face sun, okay, no, too much. Okay, so we could droop them over like so, which might be a nice look for us here. Let's just try it. Might be a little too extreme. Difficult to tell until you see the test render. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, that rendered in fairly nicely. It's pretty straight across the bottom, and it's pretty well shaped. Now, for a normal tree, I probably wouldn't do more tweaking to this. Quite like it, to be honest. Obviously, we need to do some remodeling on the trunk, and it needs roots, and yeah, there's still a few steps to go. But for a normal tree, this would be fine. This sort of canopy looks nice, especially when we get better lighting and better materials and whatnot. But for a bonsai tree, it needs to be maybe a tiny bit more exact. So I probably will spend some time between these parts just tweaking my modifiers, maybe tweaking the look of the leaves, just little tiny tweaks that will require a bit of time and effort. Well worth putting in. I will probably leave it in this state for the tutorial, but if I do make any tweaks, rest assured I will save a part, a scene file with those tweaks in it so you guys can see the difference. It really won't be major. It really will be, maybe a couple of degrees downward shift, maybe a force modifier to spread a leaf out or two. Very, very simple stuff, just a little time consuming. So I will see you in the next part when we will talk about making a large, complicated root structure on top of a rock for this thing. And we'll look in that part as well at different ways to move paint effects around apart from line modifiers, force modifiers. Okay, so I hope you found something in here that's useful to you, and I hope to see you in the next part. Thank you very much for watching. Okay, welcome back. So we left off with our tree here, and actually I haven't done any tweaks in between these parts just yet. I might save it until the end and go over a final tweaking part. But at the moment I want to talk about roots. So let's have a look at a root structure on a rock. And as you can see, these things can become extremely complicated. I mean, the root structure on something like this is almost as complicated as the top of the tree, if not maybe more so. So this is the kind of root structure we're looking at. Maybe we won't go quite this high off the ground, but we're certainly going to be looking at something like this. So in order for us to do this, we're going to use another tree, believe it or not. We're going to use the same tree that we used here. And to get this done, I think I'll hide this one. So let's Control H, hide that for now. And I'm going to also group these modifiers together. Modify tree, just to keep us all nice and neat, and then hide the group. Let's bring this back a second. Okay, so now we've got the tree. The modifiers are still working upon it, even though they're hidden, of course. If I bring those back, Shift H, you'll see when I hide them, they're still there. So it doesn't really matter if you hide those. Let's hide, actually let's not hide all the geometry. Let's just go in and hide the leaves. Okay, so now we've got the trunk as a base of comparison to work with. So let's make, in fact, before we do that, let's hide everything for a second. Let's make another tree. Let's come into the grid, and we're going to go to Window, Content Browser once again. So General Editors, Content Browser, and Visor for people on 2016 and below. And I'm going to use the same stroke, exactly the same stroke. Now, if I remember correctly, we had that at a scale of 50. So let's get it back to a scale of 50. And we're going to turn this into tree roots. Now, I'm going to hide my ground plane here because we're actually going to go through the ground. I.e. we're going to droop lower than the ground. And now we've got our second stroke. So let's come here. Oak, and I'm going to leave pretty much at default. I'm just going to turn the leaves off because we don't want leaves on our roots. There we go. And the thing is, all of our branches are up in the air right now. So let's get a let's lower this towards the floor for a start. Okay, now we're going to get that on the floor. So now we are on the floor. You can see, however, that it's really twisty, and again we're dealing with those forces we don't want. So down to behaviors, displacement, and let's see, we probably have curl here. Yes, we do. So there we go. You could probably put a little bit of curl on, but a little bit will go a very, very long way. So, you know, maybe better just to turn that off. Even 0.01 is nah. We can come back in and put the forces back on in a little while. Okay, we are going to want some random though, which I believe is on by default. Yes, it is. Because without that, we get this very, very inorganic pattern here. So gravity we're going to want quite high, because to force those onto the floor. But you'll notice they're all on the floor, and we will need ours to dip under the floor. So let's turn the deflection off. Boink. There we go. Now, this is a bit long, maybe, so let's go up and change the twig length. We want something that looks a bit more like so, perhaps. And the twig dropout. Let's drop out quite a few of these. And the branch dropout, again, will drop out quite a few. Maybe not that many, and then we'll get the twig twist, split twist, there we go, looking a little better. And we're going to need to edit this width scale. Now, the first thing I want to do is, I don't want my roots going straight down like this, so I'm going to actually use a floor plane here. Oops, that's not a plane, it's going on. There we go, that's a plane. And I want this to affect these. But actually a plane's probably not the best thing, because this would be on slightly uneven ground. So this will become clear in a moment, I hope. Let's use one of these bad boys and get just a gentle slope on it, like so. I'm then going to go up, I'm going to select my stroke, which, let's see, is this one the second one? And I'm going to go up to generate and let's see, make collide. Okay, so this will now collide with that. There we go. So this will push my roots up slightly, and I can change the collision settings on this in a little minute, but for now this is looking pretty good. Let me just turn my grid off. Okay, so let's push these up. And the collision settings on this tree are not very good, so let's go in and take a look at the stroke. And where are we? Forces. We have here collision somewhere. Surface collide. So that should be fine actually. Bit more gravity maybe. There we go. Okay, so that's not too bad. We're having a big problem with the width and everything else. So let's just turn the width down so we can see what we're doing. And again, this can take a bit of tweaking. We'll just come up here and twig base width, twig tip width, twig base width. There we go. Much better. So now we're not dealing with all that massive width. We're sticking to the ground quite nicely. And all of these would be connected to the trunk. So again, what we're going to try and do is put something rock shaped in here. So I'm going to again use a sphere. And my rock's going to be a bit like so. Now we'll be sculpting this rock out in Mudbox later on. So let's select the stroke and let's see here. So we want again generate and we make collide. There we go. So that's not going to get it done, is it? That's a bit much maybe. Okay, there we go. So now I'll be able to sculpt a rock-like structure in there. Now we don't need to worry too much about some of these extraneous branches because we'll be converting this into a mesh and playing with it from there. So let's just bring our tree back. And that was the tree modifiers. Where is the actual tree? Here it is. And so, okay, so our base root structure here is far too small. Now we see our tree, but that's no problem. We can just play around here with the global scale of this. So let's go up to 150. Okay, and that's the trunk, so let's scale this up a bit now as well. There we go. Wait, not too much. We actually do want these roots to disappear into the ground at some point as well, so I might do this just to give it a bit of variety. There we go. As you can see, I'll have some roots, if this would be the ground plane now, I'll have some roots that disappear into the ground before others. And I've got a big open section there too. So let's come in and let's look at that, what it looks like. Okay, so the width at the top here is not brilliant, but again we're going to be sculpting a lot of this. This is just for our base detail here. Let's come in and take a look at the stroke and let's twist it a bit so we get some over here. We don't need all of them, of course, but let's twist that. So split angle. Okay, yeah, I kind of liking that angle for that one. Split twist. Let's see, can we get a slightly more even distribution here? Yes, we can, but then I'm not liking that angle. So this is a tad tricky. Let's see if we can get the twig angle a bit more down towards the ground. There we go. Perfect. Okay, and again, you're not going to get this perfect. You're really not. We're going to have to come in and edit the mesh. But for a complicated root structure, I mean, there we go. We are not bad at the moment. And we're going to put a little rock underneath here, so again it will need tweaking. And I just want to come up and move this slightly. There we go. Perfect. Right, let's convert this to geometry. So what I'd like to do at this stage is save out a scene file, because I'm going to convert this to geo and start chopping it up now. If it doesn't look good, we might have to come back to it. So it's always worth having a scene file saved with all your paint effects on. So let's file, save scene as, and let's do a, let's see, PFX part 4, I think we're on. There we go. Let's just save that. Alright, so quite liking the look at this. Now let's convert it. So modify, and where are we? Convert paint effects polygons. Okay. Now what we need to do is get rid of this trunk. So I'm going to take the face there, hit B to turn off my soft selection, which I had on for some reason, and I'm just pressing Shift and the forward arrow, the forward, the greater than sign. So that will just allow you to select all the faces in the trunk, because we're not going to need it, and hit delete, get rid of it. Okay. So that's looking much more root-like now. Now we've got rid of that big mess in the middle. Now I would as well lift this up like so, because that's going to give us space underneath for our rock. And what is this? We don't need this. So face, delete, and I'm going to have to get rid of a few bits and pieces here. So again, just Shift greater than arrow. And no, I've got something else there. And I think these are all now just part of the main branching. Maybe that one is not. But, you know, a bit of cleanup work to be done. Nothing major for a root system this complicated. Okay, and let's put in a substitute rock. So let's get in here a substitute rock. So something like so would be about right, I should think. There we go. And again, we're going to be sculpting this out. So for right now, we're just doing like a proxy object for it, if you like. And you know, I probably come in here and fatten this one out, lift this one up a bit, which you can do with paint effects modifiers, or we can do in the final sculpt. Let's put a floor plane back in so we can have a look at what this would look like. There we go, floor plane, and we want to give it a bit more than that. So maybe like so. And you can see we've got some roots that branch out further than others now. Now let's go back to our camera angle, okay, which was here, and let's take a render of that with a new root structure. I'll just apply the same tree material to the root structure. So I think it was this one we have for the trunk. Right now, obviously we haven't looked at that yet, and I'll just do a, yeah, I'll just leave that as light grey, why not? Okay, here we go. And should see a complex root structure. Okay, there we go, a somewhat complex root structure. Now, let's modify it. Because I'm not happy with it, or I'm not 100% happy with it. I'm quite happy with the general look, but I would like to make it wider at the base here. So let's come in to our stroke 2, which would be, now I've gone completely blind. There it is. So let's come in and tweak the base width of these. So let's find the width scale here, tube width number 2, which will be the width at the end. So let's make that slightly smaller, and let's make this slightly, okay, that's having a huge impact on that, so let's put it like so. There we go, that's not too bad. They got a bit fatter. Now width scale, we can come in and play with this now. So this is rather stepped and messy. So I'll get rid of a few of these up here. There we go. And pull this one up, which will make us much wider at the base there, and this one. And I don't want this steppity doodah here. So that's looking a bit wider. And we'll go in and we'll manually edit a lot of this stuff. We can also use a force modifier to force these roots up here a bit, because I'm not quite liking the way this one is sitting. Again, we could just take this the geometry way. Simpler in some cases. But let's go up to generate and let's apply a create modifier. And let's make this a bit bigger. And as we move it up, you'll see the impact that's having. So again, we don't want width. We would probably like some upward directional force. So let's see, upward directional force, brush attributes, let's just try force in general. Okay. So let's see where it gets where we want it to get. So that's a bit better. Yeah, and this gives us room to sculpt our rock up here, so I'm liking all that. Yeah, this gives us a little hole. We could bring the rock down through here, maybe continue the trunk. So why we're doing this with paint effects, one of the reasons is we now have reusable components. I can come in here, take this root structure and click on its modifier, come in and randomize it. So if we look here, we'll have a seed value, which is the random seed. So this doesn't let me create roots for one tree, this lets me create roots for a whole bunch of trees. And I can do that same thing with my oak tree itself here. So the seed is 0 at the moment. As you can see, we can get a whole bunch of different looking trees. Now we've got force modifiers set up here, which is why it's behaving so strangely. So you'd have to go in and change those. But you know, the fact of the matter is we have reusable components, which is always nice, because very rarely when you're set dressing are you going to be able to replicate exactly the same tree and put them in a line. If you're doing a florist or something, you know, you might need 7 or 8, 20, 50, God knows how many examples of bonsai tree, and you know, now we would have the ability to do that much quicker than if we'd have sculpted it in something like ZBrush. So let's get another shot of this complex root structure. So let's kidnap that one and see what a difference our changes have made here. So that's a little better. We've pushed them up in the air a bit more. We've got more room to sculpt our rock underneath. Of course, you could just nip that modifier down a bit if you wanted them to lie a bit flatter. And the connection with the trunk is not brilliant. It looks like they're just sticking out. There's no sort of sculpted value on the trunk, but we'll get into sculpting in the next part. Now is the time to do the tweaks you want with your tree. I'm going to go ahead and save this as the end of part 4. So I'll save that as the end of part 4, and I do apologize, it looks like I've managed to miss saving a couple of steps, but you know, going from part 1 to here should be fine for the scene files, so that's okay, I think. But really now is the time when we're going to start converting to geometry and dropping the paint effect. So you won't be able to change it once we start sculpting on it. Well, you would, but it would become much more difficult and time consuming. So now is the time to finish your tweaks. If you need to do any, you can use modifiers to push the branches around. You can use collision objects, bring it up here if you want this completely straight. Many things you can do. I hope I've managed to cover it enough so you can go ahead and do that. And if I make tweaks to this, which probably won't be a lot, as I said in the previous part, I will save a tweak file just so you can compare the settings. So thank you very much for watching this. I hope this has been useful to you, and I'll see you in the next part. Hi, welcome back. So in between these parts I've done a little bit of tweaking to our tree, nothing drastic. I've created a large collision object just to push the bottom of those roots through, because we had them, you know, dangling down, and I decided as we went to the trouble of making them, we might as well have them there. You know, they might end up getting covered by the ground plane, but it's a small tweak just to create one of these collision objects with our paint effect. The other tweak I made was to the leaves. Now, They're going to look quite a bit different than when you last saw them, but it's actually just one setting I've changed here. So if I go into the stroke and look under the leaves, here we are, you'll see all I've done is turned on leaf forward twist. So this has just twisted the leaves forward, and this has taken us from a render that looked like this, you know, with the leaves kind of more scattered about, to a render with more uniform leaves. And I just thought that this was nicer for this style of tree. Now your mileage may vary, of course, but really as to the tweaking I did in between the parts, that was about it. So nothing major there. And again, you know, I actually quite like both of these. So realistically, you know, it's up to you. I'm going to stick with this one, however. I just feel it's a little neater for this type of design. Alright, so now we need to clean up, because we've got roots, we've got a trunk, we've got leaves, but we've got a mess down here which is absolutely no good at all when you're working, especially if you're going to be working with a team of people. You can't be handing stuff like this off, and even for yourself later on when we're transferring this between, say, our texturing app or our sculpting app or whatnot, you're just going to get in a huge mess. So first things first, we're going to organize this, and then we're going to take a look at cleaning up the root system here, because there'll be a lot of nasty unwanted geometry in the middle, as you can see. And generally this is all split geometry, so we're going to go in and combine this, and generally we're going to spend this particular episode just tidying this up so we can get ready to sculpt our rock in here in Maya, or our proxy rock, and then make a pot for this thing. So first off, let's take all our line modifiers, let's keep everything as organized as we possibly can, and hit Ctrl G to group those. So I'm just going to give that group the name of line mod, and then I'm going to go in and select all my collision objects. So this would be a collision object, yes it would. This would be a collision object, I believe. No, actually that's just the ground plane. Ground, so collision object, and this sphere, I think it was just a stand-in for the rock. Yes, it was, so we'll just hide that. We don't actually need that anymore. Okay, ground plane, sphere 2, let's show it. That's also a collision object, so collision object, collision object. And do we have any more collision objects? We do not, so Control G to group, and I'll just make this collision geo. You know, if you come back to this scene file in a while as well, this is going to be very handy. So we'll call this main root, and this modify tree. Okay, so we have some line modifiers already. So let's take those, middle mouse drag them into the line mod group. There we go, and now we can get rid of that. And I did add a couple more line modifiers. Excuse me, I completely forgot. In between the parts, they're just force ones to help structure the branches a bit. So basically they're just, you know, moved into the branches with a little force applied to spread those branches out a bit. So nothing, again, that we haven't covered already. Okay, so what is this sphere? Okay, can I show that hidden, please? There we go. Okay, so F to zoom in on that. And, yeah, that is actually a collision object. Okay, so let's put that into collision geo. And now we have the stroke here. Okay, so this is the main tree. Okay, this is the main tree geometry, so geo, and this root system here would be the main roots geo, and this would be the roots paint effect. So paint effect, and this would be the main tree paint effect. So I'm just hitting Control G there again. And rename, come on. No, it doesn't want to, for some strange, bizarre reason. Ah, there we go. Okay, now we have ground, so tree geos can go up here together. Line modifiers, everything up. Collision geometry, main roots paint effect, main tree paint effect. Okay, this polygon plane is probably superfluous to requirements. Let's just have a look at it, and that would act as, yeah, nothing at all. Alright, so now we're nice and organized here. If we hand the file off to somebody else, it should be very obvious to them what's doing what. And also when we come back to it later for the second chapter of this, when we get into things like Mudbox and painting in other applications, then yeah, that's going to be very helpful to us. So now we need to clean up this root system, and if I hide the main tree, so Control H, you'll see we've got a lot of nasty geometry in there that we don't need. I mean, there's no point having all that extra geo in the middle of the tree. So if we come in and main tree geometry, now it's easy to find, we can unhide that, so Shift H, and we can get a look now at what we want to cut out. I can also go now and easily hide all these line modifiers, Control H, no point having them about in the scene, and I can hide all the collision geometry as well, Control H, there we go. Now, an easy way to, let's hide the leaves as well, Control H, don't need them. Now, we need a cutting guide here. We could try and use X-ray to see through it and where we're cutting, but this is going to be a little tricky because of all these branches in the way. Now, an easy way would be to take, say, a cylinder, and let's go into the channel box here and make that a very thin cylinder. So let's do a thickness of 0.2, and I'm just going to scale this cylinder up until it just barely bisects the trunk in every direction, and that will be my cutting guide. Because I want to cut out as much as I possibly can. There we go. So maybe a little bit thinner this way. There, done. Now I can hide this, and I have here this cutting guide. So we're probably best off doing this in the top view, and quite easy to see in here as well, actually. So we'll just grab the faces for these, and then we'll grab the lasso tool, and we'll come in using our cutting guide and hit delete. Now we're going to have to tidy that up, but we'll talk about that in a moment. And then I can just also go back to object mode and get rid of my cutting guide. So we've chopped out a whole bunch of useless geometry out the middle there, and let's bring the trunk back in. Okay, and make sure we got it right. We did. So we've also got what appears to be a whole bunch of geometry left behind, but that's okay, we'll be cleaning that in a minute. Now, these roots are actually not one object, they're individual objects. So if I do a mesh separate, you can see here that they're actually made up of lots of different objects. Now, this can cause us problems down the line. In our case, it's not going to, because I'm not going to hand animate this tree, and I'm not going to do really a lot of twisty animation on this. So for the fact that it's separated here, it's not a huge problem. I would like it grouped together. So what I would do is come in, select them all from one root. So take one root here, one main trunk from the root, and collect all the small pieces. Now once you've done this, if you needed one whole contiguous piece of geometry, you can retopologize using the quad draw tool. It's a very time consuming process. I'm not going to go into it here, and because it's genuinely not necessary for what we're doing. But if you're interested in retopology, the Batman tutorial that we have, either the head is probably the best one for that. That has Jason Edwards, who's extremely good at that sort of thing, retopologizing an entire head in there. So if you're interested in retopology and you're one of our subscribing members, you might want to go and check that out if it's of interest to you. But for us, this is all we're going to need to do. So we're going to select these as so. And I'm just getting everything that comes off one main branch. Okay, here we go. Little time consuming, little bit of a pain in the backside, but worth doing. Right, so I believe that to be everything. Yep. So I picked a big branch to start with. Now we need to hit Mesh Combine. And that gives us one single piece. We can hit 3 to smooth, and that's looking much better. Now we are going to come in and sculpt some detail on these, but first I want to clean up all this nasty geo at the back. So go to Show, Isolate Selected, View Selected, and you can see here that we have a bunch of geometry. Let's go out of Smooth with 1 on the keyboard. That's genuinely not necessary. So let's clean it up. Easy way, click this face. Click this one, that will highlight all the faces in between, hit delete, and then just double click on all the faces left behind and hit delete. And now we have a nice tidy branching root. Okay, so now we could start pulling that around, sculpting it a bit more into the trunk. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with all of these. I don't think you need to sit and watch me do that. And I'm going to clean up any geometry that's left over in here. So for instance, if I just start clicking around, we can see that's attached to a root. That's not, that's not, that's not, that's not. These are all old artifacts of the trunk here. So most of them are just ends of roots, and some of them are just leftover bits of geo. Root, 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 root. Oh, no, not actually. Okay, so in between the parts, you can obviously open the scene file. I'll save this as part 5 with all of this combined together. And then we'll come back in, look at sculpting them more into the trunk, and possibly start on our rock sculpture or maybe the modeling for the pot. But I'll be back in the next part when this is all nice and tidy. Now, I know this part has been a little dull on the cleanup and things like this, but they are essential before we progress to the next step. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in a moment when I've done all this. Okay, welcome back. So in between the parts, I've just gone ahead and combined all of these root structures into their own separate branches, if you like, where they're branched out from the trunk. Nothing to it really. Just allows us to move them around more easily, which we're going to have to do in a second. Now, I'm going to sculpt in this part within Maya a rock. It's going to be a fairly low-res rock. What would normally happen is you would make a base object, a base mesh in a program like this, and then move along to something either ZBrush or Mudbox or something similar to sculpt in the high detail. Because when we do high detail for something like a rock, if you wanted sort of photorealistic rock, you're going to be working with a couple of million polys probably in an application like Mudbox or ZBrush. And here in Maya, we don't want massive objects. We want low poly objects for a variety of reasons. So we're going to sculpt out a rock in fairly high res, probably about 15,000–20,000 polys, and then reduce that and use that as our base mesh. Now, again, before we start, our paint effect is still connected. So if I go to the paint effect tree here, select stroke, and just, I don't know, turn off tubes, you'll see that my geometry disappears. Now we do not want this connected to the paint effect, so we're going to disconnect it, and to do that it's really rather simple. You just select all the geometry and delete its history. So let's show the leaves here so I can select them. So select the geometry. In fact, we can just do this, of course. Now we've organized it, and edit, delete by type, history. No, not all, just delete by type, history, and that disconnects us from the paint effect. So again, if I go to the paint effect and turn the tubes off, nothing happens. So we are entirely disconnected. Now it is worth noting that even though we're disconnected from that, we can go Control H and hide the geo. In fact, the geo, there we go, Control H. And if I brought back the main tree paint effect, so click on its stroke, Shift H, click on its stroke, you can see the color influence from our modifiers. I could now go edit, what do I need? Modify, convert paint effects to polygons, and it would make an entirely new tree with a new set of geometry. So keeping this handy if you want to make another tree, similar one but with different leaves, different thing, is very good, is very helpful. Let's just hide that and bring back the geo. And the same with the roots. You could make different roots, a different tree entirely from that base paint effect. So it is well worth keeping those paint effects, even though they are now disconnected from this particular geometry. So, rock. Now, I want mine to be in a kind of cheese wedge shape. I think very interesting if this wasn't just sitting on a flat rock, if it was sitting on a sloped rock. So we're going to have to pick a high side for this tree and a low side, and then we're going to have to move the roots down on the low side. And this is not a lot of work here. So let's pick a high side, and where we've got this big branching sticky up one here, I think that will be the high side. So let's create first of all a object to sculpt on. So we'll create this box here, and I'm just going to scale this out till it's the right size. Now I'm going to get that to come to really the end of the roots on both sides, so like so, and then I'll just scale up until we hit the high side. There, that's the high side. That would be the bottom of the high side. Now it's useful to have a bit of geometry underneath, because when we start pulling things around, we don't want this lifting out of the floor. So that will do us for our base object. Now you could start much smaller and add geometry to it, which is probably the way I would do it in ZBrush. But in Maya, for the sculpting tools, they're much better than they used to be. It's still easier to remove material. It's still easier to do a subtractive sculpt. So we're going to start off with probably more geometry than we need, noting this is the high side of the geo here. Now before we do that, I'm going to pull the trunk down until we hit, even the trunk is naturally kind of sloped in that way, so definitely high side here, low side here. Let's just select the edge of the trunk, and let's grab its, whoops, wrong one, trunk, object, edge, and there we go. And let's put the soft selection brush up, so B, middle mouse drag, and go up there, just so when we pull this down, all of these pull with it. So we don't get like a nasty intrusion of one really long polygon followed by a whole bunch of short ones. Okay, so that seems fine. And now we've got the low side. So we're going to have to move these roots down to reflect the fact that they're on the low side. Okay, let's do a gradual kind of sloping motion here. And this one can come down a bit. And possibly this one up a bit. There we go. And those ones are absolutely fine. So now we've got a distinct slant, which is exactly what we needed. Now you need to come in here and rotate these roots about a bit, but we'll look at doing this afterwards. So we're going to rotate, move up. As you can see, nothing really major. And again, this would be a personal preference thing. And I'm going to sculpt this more into the trunk as well. So for now, let's just move them up a bit. Get them sort of where I want them. Okay, and things like this edge, let's come here. This edge is now a bit too far down, so we can try moving that up. Might even rotate it a little bit, pull it downwards. There we go. So just things like this, you know, to be aware of. But that's looking all right. And I'm going to do a final cleanup part where I come in and branch these together basically, so it looks like one bigger root coming out into a smaller one. But this is all sort of artistic choice and what look you're going for, really. At the moment, we just need to make sure that we have basically a high side and a low side, and I think we do. Alright, so let's bring in our rock. Now, as I probably mentioned, I will be doing the high detail displacement work. I'll be doing a tutorial on Mudbox and possibly, if requested, ZBrush. But we have plenty of ZBrush stuff on SimplyMaya, so probably I'll use Mudbox. And I will use this object as a proxy to take into a proper sculpting application. So what we're looking for here is a fairly low geo proxy shape. And when I say fairly low geo, you know, we might hit 50,000 polys, probably not, probably more like 20. But it's going to then be reduced in Maya to be a low poly object where we'll take into a surface detailer and create a displacement map for it. But if you don't want to do that, you will be able to get a reasonable looking rock out of Maya. You know, you're better off using something like ZBrush or Mudbox, but you know, if you don't want to, you don't have those applications, you will be able to get something that looks reasonably okay with this technique. So let's go down to the channel box here and give this some geometry. So let's go subdivisions and let's go 60, 60, 60, which gives us a poly count of 21,000, which for sculpting is tiny. I mean, if you've never sculpted in ZBrush or Mudbox, you go into the millions of polys easily. But this will be fine for us. Okay, so I'm just seeing if we need to maybe bring this up a bit. And this will be our high side here. So I'm going to actually mark it as the high side. Okay. So this will be our low side. This is just a marker for me so I can go high over here, low over here. Now let's go to the sculpting menu, make sure we've selected this, and first off we're going to use the scrape tool to scrape away huge amounts of this because we don't need it. Now let's go double click into the tool settings and reset the tool so we're just at normal. Now to change the brush size, B middle mouse drag, and yeah, sorry, not middle mouse drag in this case, B left mouse button drag, and we're going to use a fairly large brush and we're just going to come in and really start scraping the edges of this thing away. We're not going to be too concerned right now with the general shaping. That will come later. Right now we're just doing a scrape. And I'm going to scrape off the back low side before I get anywhere near the high side. So you see I'm kind of scraping off in a triangle. Now we've got a lot of material to scrape away here. And you see where we've got these edge build-ups. We can come in and smooth those out before they become an issue. And that is not smooth, is it? Let me just undo that. That is smooth. Okay. I am on the smooth tool here. Okay, yeah, that is smoothing. Just smooth that out so we don't have that nasty line going round. And this can be a time-consuming process, you know. As with everything in 3D, really. So scrape, there we go. And we are getting closer. Now you want to be careful about scraping too much from the bottom. Now we can also use the sculpt tool for this, so sculpt tool, and this will add geometry to it. That sculpt tool seems to have some sort of stencil attached to it, which doesn't give an unpleasant effect, but let's look and stamp. Yes, we are using a stamp. So the sculpt tool will add the geometry by default. If you click Control, it will smush it downwards, or it won't add geometry, but it will pull it outwards by default. If we hold Control, it will push it inwards, and that goes for pretty much all the tools in the Maya sculpting kit. If one does, pull a surface forwards, if you hold Control, generally it will pull that surface backwards, or push it in. Pull it forward, push it in. So now we're starting to see the roots on the back side. This is very nice. And again, even though we're fairly low poly, with that stamp tool we managed to get some surface detailing in there, so it is possible to do this without going to another set of applications. I mean, personally, at some point you're going to probably need a surface detailer or a full sculpting application for surface detailing and generation of things like vector displacement. I use Mudbox. For the full sculpt, ZBrush. But again, that's completely down to you. If you want to do it all in Maya, you can. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is possible. Let's just scrape that off. We'll go back to the scrape tool. And where we did that surface detail there, we've got some nastiness. So we'll just smooth that out now, because we don't want that. Let's zoom in so we can see what's going on. Oh yeah, that's become pinched together. We don't really want pinching in our mesh at this point. And again, we've become pinched together here, overlapped. So just be a bit mindful about things like that. But we've scraped off quite a bit of the back here. I'm going to scrape off a bit more, of course. There we go. Scrape, scrape, scrape. And this is easier with a tablet. Unfortunately, my colleague has nicked mine at the moment. You can do it with a mouse, as well as I am doing. Let's scrape off some of the front now and start reducing this as a whole. Let's say we might have started with a bit too much geometry here. I might have overkilled it a bit. But again, nothing to be concerned about. Just takes that extra little bit of time, and in terms of 3D, 20 minutes, 25 minutes to sculpt a base object is really no big deal. I'm coming in there with a smooth brush just to get rid of that edge before it becomes an issue. Okay, because you don't want that pinching together too much. That would be a problem later on down the line, and it's easy to fix right now. So back to scraping. Continuously scraping. And even though we're doing a lot of material pushing and pulling about here, starting with a bigger shape often leads you to a more organic look at the end of the day as well, because you've got all the randomness of removing material. So at the back here, so we definitely want to come in and start lowering this backside down a bit. Now that is kind of the limit for our lowering, so let's go to the sculpt tool and press Control, and let's just start exposing some roots here. We've got a kinked bit of geometry we should take care of. Whoops, I took my finger off Control there for a second. Okay, let's sculpt a bit back in here and a bit back in here. Now we'll come in with a finer brush. Let's get rid of that kink, because we do not want those. Now we'll come in with a brush on a lower power setting. At the moment we're just doing kind of massive amounts of material stripping. So let's go to sculpt again and start to get rid of some of this here. Now this is going to be the low side rock, so I think, yep, there's our little sphere. And you obviously don't need one of those little spheres in your viewport. I just find sometimes it's quite handy to give yourself sort of a visual cue that's easy to go, am I sculpting the right side of the rock? Yes, yes I am. I find it very easy to get kind of lost in your own head when you're sculpting away. Okay, so that probably better off scraped off. But again, let's expose these roots. Lovely, and now we're starting to get somewhere. Let's pull this in, pull it in, actually push it up a bit because we're going to need some underneath. Which is why we left ourselves some room on the floor, some stuff underneath, because it's easier when you're sculpting to the floor like this. Okay. Just going to bring that out a little bit. And how are we looking? Not too bad at the moment. You know, we could do with putting a bit of geometry back in here, because we've gone a bit too far down now. There we go. Same here. There we go. And this is sort of fine detailing that will probably come back. Well, we will come back and do in a little while. Okay, that root should be out of there. There we go. And how about these ones? This could actually do with some build up here. But the brush I'm using is too big for fine detailing, so I'm just going to ballpark it, if you like. And here we need to expose this root structure. Okay, and this is fine as well. If we ended up with a little bit like this, this would turn into you know, part of the muddy ground that we're going to have. So scrape away here, and so we can start to expose this top portion. We'll start to add some harder edges and detailing, as I said, in a moment. Now we want to be careful not to scrape too much of the top away here, because we definitely want that cheese wedge shape, as I said. And sculpt. And let's just come in and use Control to start exposing the bottom of these roots here. Again, much easier with a tablet, this would be. In this case, for something like this, that's this low detail, it's not, strictly necessary. But we all miss our toys, of course. I'm certainly missing mine around now. So let's come in and grab that, grab this. Okay, let's just expose this root here. Scrape that bit off. We've got a bit too much here, so let's scrape it down. And sculpt. We could use foamy to add surface lift if we needed to come in and lift up the surface. And again, you can use it to create surface unlift with Control. That's probably, again, the brush is a bit too harsh, but we'll come back and look at some detailing. And that needs to be scraped. Okay, and we've got a situation here, folks. We used too much reverse foam and we've created a big nasty patch. So we really need to take care of that before it completely folds in on itself and becomes an issue. Not liking that at all. Come on, open up. Now we could try the fill hole here, which I don't normally use these ones, so I'm normally used to the Mudbox ones, and for some reason they're slightly different. So flatten is definitely not gonna do it. Pinch, can we do a reverse pinch on this? No, that's just gonna pinch it closer together. So flatten, no, that's not gonna do it. Repeat, no. Imprint, wax. Scrape, fill tool. Now, nope, that works differently than it does on Mudbox slightly. So let's just keep smoothing this out. There we go, and you'll eventually get there. Bit of a pain, but we do not want that. That would be a problem later on. Okay, so we've got the sort of basic shape of our rock here, and we've still got a few bits to scrape away, so use foamy because we've been using sculpt now for a while with Control, and you can see we can just take some bric-a-brac off there. Sculpt is probably better for this, but you get a look at another tool, so why not? And scrape. Wait, let's come over here and scrape. No, it's folded in on itself. That's not good. So once again, we are here with smooth. Because we don't want folded over geometry. Again, would be a problem. And let's change the amount of smoothing. Let's do a massive amount of smoothing. Still going to take, time to come in and correct these. But that's not looking too bad now. And we don't mind some hard edges. We just don't want geometry that's folded in on itself, like this very nasty bit here. That's not gonna do at all. Okay, let's see, how's the general shape? General shape is looking pretty good. I might lower the low side a bit, but we're looking fairly rock-like now. And we've got our roots exposed. Now it's a case of coming in and putting a little bit of detail into this. Now normally I wouldn't do that because again I would use a sculpting application, but for those of you that want to do the whole thing in Maya, for whatever reason, maybe you're not a user of a sculpting application or a surface detailer, I'll come in and show you just how to put a little bit of detail in this, and we'll go ahead and we'll use some smaller brushes and kind of fill in the gaps here. Make some square plateaus and continue to sculpt out our little rock. So I hope this has been of some interest to you, and we'll be back in the next part to finish off our rock, and then after that we will model the pot, and then we will be done with this particular piece of set dressing really. There will be a chapter 2 where I go into high detail, high resolution surface detailing, textures, probably a bit on how to quickly sort out UVs for something like this, but this first chapter I want to keep it to the modeling of our tree, our rock, our paint effects, and all of this. I think it's enough for one go. So I'll see you in the next part, and I genuinely hope you've been enjoying this. Thank you very much for watching. Okay, welcome back. So we're going to finish off the sculpting of our rock here, and I like this front rock to come to kind of an abrupt jaggedy edge here. So we're going to have to adjust the position of these roots, but that's no big thing. So let's come in once again and we'll use the scrape tool to scrape some off. Select a polygon mesh, there we go, that would be helpful. And for some reason it's come in, it's got the stamp on it again, which I don't want just yet, so let's turn that off and let's get scraping. Probably a bit more strength to it, there we go. And we want this to come to quite an abrupt end, much more so than on the back. Give us a much more interesting look to it. And we've got a situation back there with some pinch geometry, but I'll take care of that in a second. Flatten this out a bit, scrape this off a bit. So we're trying to come to a more kind of abrupt stop on this side. Just coming in and scraping away some of the bottom. And I've got my scrape tool set to camera, by the way, which is why it's creating these kind of indentations. Sorry, I forgot to say, if you had it along surface normal, you wouldn't get this kind of geometry, which is what we want because it's much more rock-like at the end of the day. So let's cut in here. So we've got sort of an overhang. Let's scrape that out a bit. And that out a bit. So a long camera will give you these harder edges, which we want for this particular rock. Scrape away some here. Okay, now that is obviously ridiculous. We do not want that. So let's go in to flatten maybe this time, and try and flatten that out and see if it works on this. Fill hole, where is flatten? Come on. There it is. And brush size much smaller, and let's try flattening this out. Now this should be a long normal. Okay, well I said my sculpting tools had got a little better, and indeed they have, but they are definitely still not up to the standard they would be in Mudbox. But you can get the job done with them like we just did. So I quite like that kind of rocky outcropping we've got there. Anything else needs smoothing out while I have the tool? Yeah, a bit down here. Come on. And you really do need to watch those folded over bits of geo. They really can creep up on you. So that's a bit of a sharp cut in there. Let's just change that to a more gradual cut in. And possibly this overhang is a bit too big under here. So let's fill that in a bit. Let's use wax because we haven't used that in a while. Oops, it's far too strong. There we go. And just fill in a little bit here. Okay, I'm pretty much liking the edge of that now. And the back is looking pretty good. Now, we do have this issue now that our roots aren't quite on par. And that's not quite smooth enough for me underneath there. So let's do a bit of smoothing. With a bit nicer geometry placement. Okay, and now it's a case of, do you want to edit the look of the rock or do you want to edit the look of the roots? Now I'm quite pleased with the general base mesh of the rock, so I'm going to edit the roots. I'm going to add a little bit more rock up here, so let's go to the sculpting tool and just pull this out, and again that's way too strong. This is where pen pressure on a tablet really comes in handy. For things like this. Just want to get a bit more rock up here, a bit more up here. Give these roots kind of more of a base to sit on, and this can be a bit of a time-consuming process. Okay, and now do we want to conform the rock surface to the roots or the roots to the rock surface? Well, in my case at the moment I'm quite pleased with the rock surface, for being a base object. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to go to edge mode, I'm going to select an edge here, or at least I'm going to try, and grab an edge. Why won't you grab an edge? Oh, it is. I've got the soft selection turned way up. So middle mouse drag for soft selection, and let's try and maneuver this closer to the surface of the rock here. So there we go, that's conformed a bit more. Let's do this one and move this up. This is can be again a little time consuming, and we'll just continue that trend downwards. Just adjusting a little bit at a time to get these roots to go more where we want them to. So we're going to have to drop this one quite a bit. There we go. And that starts to contour and follow along with the surface of our rock. And I want to bend this root to stick to the front of that root face. That's going to be quite tricky. Let's just continue working on this one for a second. Okay, so that's all right. Move it up from here maybe. And again, there's no science to this. There's no, I can't tell you pull the 14th vertex along and, magic will happen. You just got to come in and tweak it. Now this soft selection brush is set too high right now, so I'm going to make it a bit smaller. There we go, just so I can kink this one in, and then this one, so it's not, oops, soft selection brush again is way too high. Oh no, actually I'd selected the wrong thing. Okay, getting a look round at that. That's pretty close. It doesn't have to absolutely hug the surface of the rock. You just need to get it close enough. So with this one is going to be a bit of an issue. Let's see if we can rotate it around instead. Now that's going to be tricky. And that's now totally kinked, so that's no good at all. Okay, might have to end up separating the geometry on this, but let's deal with these bigger ones because these will be the real telling issue. So let's go in and do the edge. Whoops, I've got the wrong edge. Object mode, edge. Soft selection is not high enough. That's a bit better. You know, with tree roots we're quite lucky because they are by their very nature fairly random things, following the contours of the ground and whatever happens to be around them. So we can get away with quite a lot of pushing and pulling here. And that one seems much better. Let's just pull it up a bit here. Whoops. Okay, so that's contouring more to the shape of our hill now. Now this one. I can't use the shortcut keys on the keyboard for various selection modes because it interferes with the recording, which makes me a little slower. I'm sorry about that. We want to be a bit careful of kinking it out too much. Let's just work our way back towards the rock face here. Seeing as we go, if we could pull from somewhere else. Now this is bisected. But bisection is okay, it's not a terrible thing. Let's see, yeah, this is looking pretty decent so far. Just this one that's really sticking up and letting the side down. Let's move it out a bit, in a bit, and then go up here and adjust this slightly. There we go. And this root would actually be sitting on top of this one, so let's not move it down too high. And let's look at that. Yeah, quite happy actually. Let's make this object mode. There we go. I'm not used to changing it that way, so which one is this? So let's get the edge here. And I believe that's the one we need. Yeah, it is. And I was just going to pull that up a bit. So it looks kind of like so. And I'll probably make it a bit bigger and a bit wider up this way. And now it's going to need moving a bit more into the trunk. Okay, that's done. So that gives us a nice big huge root coming off there. And I'm going to do the same with this one. Let's find the inside edge for this little thing, and let's make this a bit bigger too. So first off I'm going to scale it upwards so it looks more like it's into the tree, and then we're going to scale it outwards a bit like so, and that gives us kind of a double connection on here. Now let's do the same with this one, so it looks like, you know, one big growth of root. Select the back edge and scale upwards. Okay, so that's looking a bit better. That's all come together as one big large root. And let's see, this one needs moving a bit more to the floor. It's a bit up in the air. Edge. Okay, gonna have to go here as well. Push it back a bit, push it down a bit, and we're on the rock face. Excellent. Now I'm going to do the same with these three here. I'm actually going to move this one into the center, and I'm going to make these larger. So let's go to edge mode, and let's go into the tree and find the edge of that. There we are, bit finicky. We could have isolated it, view isolate selected up there, and grabbed it that way, but managed to get it in the end, so not a huge deal. And just move that up like so, and that becomes a very large root as we wanted. Object mode, ruddy thing, edge, there we go. Let's come in here, and again select that edge. Oh, there we go, little finicky again, and move this one up and connect it to this one. So now it looks like one much bigger root. Okay, what I'm also going to do is take this here and just scale it upwards a little bit, and again with this one outwards and upwards just a little bit, just to get the look I'm going for, so that branching outwards. Okay, so instead of hundreds of little roots, we want a few big roots coming off. Now obviously when this is textured and displaced, it's going to look a lot better, but for right now, and this one looks naff. So let's pull it out. In fact, we could probably even rotate this one a tiny bit. There we go. How are we looking? Yeah, pull it in, push it up, push it down, R to make it bigger. There we go, because we want a big root structure here. And this one is not connected to the tree, so that's going to cause us a problem, isn't it? And in fact, this one that's spread out to here, let's try and connect it with this one here. So this may or may not work. This might be a bridge too far. Okay, yeah, that's alright. This one is though possibly a bit too big now. Again, it's just something you have to spend your time on. And I mean, compared to a lot of processes that you go through in a production studio, this is an extremely fast way of doing this. I had a friend recently who worked on the Jungle Book, and yeah, quite a few of them in the office spent months on one tree. So, you know, 3D work is not quick. And if you want it done well, this is the kind of thing you have to do. Oh, I see, we've actually got a little branch coming down here, so let's do, how is that going to affect our rock? Yeah, let's just do a small sculpt here and expose it. So I'm going to use a small brush with a light, and do we have a stamp on that? No, we don't. Are we on the sculpt tool? Yes, we are. I don't think we just don't have enough geometry there. So I'm going to have to just expose it, and then no, we don't. It's just okay. It's just not happy. Fine. It will smooth out. And let's try foamy to take a bit of geometry away. There we go. And smooth out. That's becoming a bit of a pain to sculpt on this thing now. We are kind of reaching, well, I wouldn't say the limits of my sculpting capacity, but certainly we're reaching the kind of edge of what I like to do when I'm sculpting in Maya. I'm sure there are some people out there that are absolutely fantastic at it. There always is. But for me, I'm just going to ZBrush or Mudbox or something similar. Okay, so that's exposed enough of that. We've got some nice trunking roots around here. And this one is a problem. So let's just connect that into the tree, and that's nice. They all look connected together now in a rather nice way. And I'm kind of happy with this back bit and with our front bit and our sheer cliff edge there. You could sculpt on it some more, of course. You can use the stamp tools to add high surface detail, stuff like that. Okay, now we've got a root here that is bisected. And this is going to add a nice level of detail to our final tree. The fact that we take the time to make sure these roots are not intersecting with each other and lay them down properly and stuff like that, it's going to look real nice. So a couple of intersections here and there you're going to get away with. But let's just look, that one's nicely laid over that one goes over that one. This here is a bit of a mess, but actually it's not too bad. Here's an intersection here we can avoid. Okay, not with the soft selection brush, we're not. So this one we'll have to do the old-fashioned way. Okay, so that's not intersected. It's just the main ones we're looking at really, where the big intersections would happen. That's a little bit intersection down there, but I like it. It looks all muddled up and quite nice. And yep, quite happy with that, honestly. Now we've got this one here that doesn't really lie with the surface of the rock, so you could, if you wanted to, take out the branch that really sticks out, like so, and then we are back to pretty good, because this is coming off a straight incline. So I'm not actually an expert on trees, but that seems like that might just hang down like that. Soft selection, this one, get it up there, make it a bit larger, there we go. And oh yeah, this one is not even going back into the tree, so we must have clipped that one a bit too near, and move it over and move this over too. There we go. So it looks like we've got a a more defined root structure there, but this is actually, let's pick this one up. Let's go inside the tree, and I can see the back edge. There it is. Let's lift it up a little bit. Okay, and we might need to do a bit of a sculpting out to dig these roots out here. Let's get a sculpt and brush. Just get a nice big brush size, and we don't seem to have a lot of power. don't seem to have any power at all. Okay, wait a minute. We selected, yeah, we selected the ground plane and the, let's just go back and make sure I didn't do any damage with that. No, okay. We'd selected the ground plane and the surface we were sculpting on, so. Yep, that's now too much power. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Having a bit of a senior moment. Anything else need pushing or pulling out? In fact, that probably took away a bit too much. Let's use some foamy. Oh, too much foamy. Again, these brushes are, they're on really high settings and I have no pen pressure, so it becomes a bit more difficult. I know, excuses. Bad workman blames his tools and all that. But okay, I am really liking that root structure. And the rock as a proxy object is absolutely fine. There we go. Now, I would do a mesh reduce on this before I sent it to an application to do some more sculpting on it. I also might look at how these roots are connected to this tree, but so far, so good. I can now delete the front of the rock. And I'm going to take a render of this, and I'll be back with you guys in just a second so we can see what it looks like. So I've done a couple of test renders here, and genuinely I'm quite pleased with the way the roots conform to the surface of the rock here. There's a bit of detailing work to be done up here. I'm not best pleased with how this connects. I think it should be, more a gradual slope, but our rock base mesh here is looking very nice. Now, it's never going to look like a sharp edge defined rock without displacement map, so it's going to need a lot more detail input into it to get it realistic. Now if we just slapped a rock texture on here, it would look 100 times better, and obviously this root structure here, the texture on here is just nasty, but we can have a look from a different angle and you can see it conforms nicely here. These ones flow over the front. We've got a variety of different ones. Maybe we have too many here, so I might nip one of these out, probably this middle one. So there's a bit of work to be done yet. But, for a base mesh and for a start, this is very, very nice, I think. So one thing I would take care of is I would go in and spend a little bit more time looking at how the connections are made to the trunk. So again, just grabbing those edges, sculpting them up, doing some test renders. I might spend some time sort of grabbing these, conforming them a bit more to the rock face. Because at the moment there's one here, you see this could use moving perhaps a touch down, this one maybe a little bit over, this one is buried slightly in the rock, that's the shot with no rock, so let's flick forward, and the ones on the back are kind of okay, and again it's just little detailing work that I don't want to drag you through because it's going to be more of the same. And here, the connection to the trunk. So we looked at the connection to the trunk with the roots, but we didn't look at the connection to the trunk with the main branches. And you can see we've got some issues here. So again, I would simply take the edges at this point in the process, turn off soft selection, take the edge and scale it in. Okay, and then you might need to go and look at the second edge, make sure that's not too fat, and just make a proper connection with the trunk as we did with the roots. So, you're going to really need to spend some time on that to get your connection right. Now, I would do that, so it's still way too fat here, and way too fat here. So that's a much better branch connection in there, and the same with this one. So again, it's just all of this kind of minutiae detail that we need to get right. Okay, and that one's a little out too, so let's go here and let's scale upwards, just so it gets that sort of tapered off feeling more towards the trunk, like so, and this one like so. Okay, and now we've got a much better connection. Look at that big old branch. That looks very nice now. So, in the next part, we're going to come and we're going to create a pot. I have some images of pots here, so we'll pick one of these. Maybe this one. I quite like the longness of it. But these round ones are quite nice also, you know, depending on the look you're going for. We've got our rock here, our proxy rock. We've got our tree. We've got our roots, branches, leaves, all looking very nice, all done in a couple of hours work. So, you know, for a starting point taken to a sculpting application, or even with clever use of texture on a rock like this, you're going to get something that looks very good, you know, especially for a piece of set dressing. If this is in the background of a shot, you really wouldn't need to do any more detailing than this. The camera would never get close enough to it. If it was a hero item and you were rendering out in 4K, then yeah, you're probably going to need to add more detail to this. But seriously, if you decide not to follow me on with chapter 2 and you never get into surface detailing, it's absolutely fine. You can definitely texture up this piece of geometry here, and with a judicious use of a bump map, you'll be looking pretty good. You know, I would say definitely consider something like ZBrush or Mudbox for surface detailing if you're making a hero item, but for something in the background, you know, this is going to look superb. So let's come back in the next part, put a pot on this and do some sculpting of the ground of the pot. Where the soil is, we'll want a slight build up. We don't want this sitting on a flat sheet. And we'll be ready then for chapter 2. So I hope you join me in the last and probably final part, and hope you continue through with me onto the next chapter where we'll look at making this more of a hero object. So thank you very much for your time. I hope this has been of interest to you, and I see you in the next part. Hi, welcome back. So in the previous part we kind of finished sculpting our rock here and aligning our roots. Now there's a bit of cleanup work for me to do there, and I shall do that before I release the tutorial. But for right now I just want to finish this off with the final part for this chapter, which will be creating a pot for this. Now if I bring open my JPEG here of pots, I'm rather partial to this big tall one. However, as I'm going to use this tree in a number of set dressing projects I've got coming up, I've got an interior to furnish and whatnot, then this pot might make it a bit tall if I want to put it on a bookshelf or something like this. So for now I'm going to build a smaller kind of oval style pot like this, rather nice, so shouldn't take long to build and it will texture up really nicely. So let's get on with that. And normally I'd start from a box, but just to be a little different, I'm going to start with a sphere. I'm going to scale this to a reasonable size. I can get it to actual size in a minute. And as I'm not working to any particular reference, I don't need to worry about bringing in image planes. I'm just going to make a pot in this style. It doesn't have to be this exact size or dimensions. If it did, simply bring in your image planes and work from your reference. Now, because at the top of these things you end up with a bunch of triangles, there's a very easy way to turn this into a bunch of four-sided polys, which is just to delete every second edge. That will leave you with a huge pole, which is not good if you want to deform this later on, but this is a pot. I might smash it into pieces, I might fill it with water, but I'm unlikely to bend it like rubber, so I'm not going to worry about having a big pole. I am going to get it into all four-sided polys, just because it's easy to do and it's good practice. So let's go down to the channel box and make sure we have 22 divisions in this axis. So this will allow us to delete every second edge, leaving quadded geometry, which I will show you in a second. Let's come in and face and chop this in half. Now you should really do this in the foreview to, you know, stop you getting some faces you don't need or some faces too few, but you know, with a giant thing like this it's pretty easy to line up in the perspective and cut it. Now let's deal, before we do with anything else, with this down here. So it's all triangles at the moment, and let's come in and just select every second edge, so holding shift, and I'm going to hit Q so the move tool doesn't keep popping up. Okay, and then holding shift, right mouse button and delete edge. Do not simply push delete because you'll leave behind a bunch of vertices probably, which you don't need. So now we've got 4 sides, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's still got this whacking great pole in the middle, but like I say, it's not going to bend like rubber, so it's not really that important. Okay, let's scale this up to a size I like. So I don't want the bottom to be completely flat, but I don't want it, half round bowl shaped either. So that seems quite nice. And then I want it more oblong, so let's move it out that way a bit. There we go. Job's a good one. Now we need to give this some thickness, because at the moment it's just a single plane, which is no good. And a very easy way to do this is to duplicate it, Control D, and then scale it in a bit. Just going to move that up like so, and that should be fine for us. Now, one thing I would say is, if we actually, before we duplicate that, let's put a side on this thing, and we're going to run into a problem with this, which I'll explain in a minute. So we're going to modeling toolkit, and let's see, extrude. So let's put that extrusion to the center and just pull it up until we've got about the right size of the pot. That gives us a nice rounded bottom and some sides to play with, maybe a tiny bit higher. Okay, now we've done that, now we can duplicate. That just saves us building those sides again. So let's scale it in a bit, and now we have to decide how thick we want it. So that seems an appropriate thickness to me, maybe a little thicker, horses for courses really. But there we go, so kind of the same thickness all the way around. Now, what we would normally do is combine these together and bridge these edges across, but that's not going to work, and we can't see that it's not going to work at the moment because we have two-sided lighting turned on. Now, that's a bad idea when you're modeling, because if I turn it off, you'll see that these grey faces are our outer face. So the black faces should be on the inside of the model, and here they're not. So if we look here on the outside of this pot, let me just bring it up so we're not. The outside of the pot, this is the inside, if you like. So these are the outer faces. Black faces should be on the interior of the model. And if we were to bridge across this gap now, these black faces would be on the exterior of the model. So if we just go to mesh display and reverse the surface normals, now this is the interior of the model, this is the bit pointing outwards, and all the black faces are on the interior. They will be inside the geometry, and that's what you need. So let's come here and combine these two together. So mesh combine, there we go, and edge, select this edge, and just hit bridge. If you try and do this without sorting the direction of the surface normals out, this bridge will just go ballistic. I will actually show you so you know what to look for. So if we separate this, mesh separate, and I'm sure a lot of you know this, but for those of you that may be just starting out, you come across problems like this, and they can actually be quite annoying to solve. So if we were to once again mesh display reverse. Okay, so now we've got that, and I had both of those because they didn't separate. Great. I'm having this problem a fair bit with Maya 2017 with the mesh combine and mesh separate not working on the first try for some reason. But here's what we had before. So with two-sided lighting turned on, everything looks perfectly normal. So you would come in here, combine these objects, mesh combine, and again you don't have to follow along with this. I'm just going to demonstrate what happens for the people who are maybe not familiar with this. And then I go to bridge like I did before, and you'll see we just can't do it. Just not having it. It's given us some bump about there being a different number of edges when we know that's not true, and blah blah blah. Occasionally it will do it, but it'll all come in sort of crisscrossed, or it will bridge right across the model. So if you get into a situation where you're trying to bridge a gap and it's not working, even though you know it should be a very easy bridging operation, make sure that you have this turned off, and black faces are going to be on the interior. So mesh separate, and you see, didn't separate. Know why? Maya 2017 is killing me with that one. So again, mesh tools, mesh display, and reverse. There we go. So now easy peasy, combine again. And yeah, this time it combined. So now when we go to edge and bridge, okay, let me just grab that and that. There we go, no problems. So that makes the basic shape of our bowl. If we hit 3, you can see that that smooths a little much at the top. So we don't want that much smoothing. We also want a bit of a lip around the top edge of this. So go to the multi-cut tool and we're going to cut out a lip here. So not too massive. There we go. Q and get a face mode. Select this face. Select the face next to it holding shift and double click. That should select the whole loop. And now we want to extrude. Click here to center the extrusion. Click here to give you access to the scale. And just scale out a little lip. Oh, what's gone on there then? Okay, for some reason we have 20 divisions. So middle mouse drag that back to 1. There we go. And that makes us a little lip. Okay, now we would be smoothing this so we can see what happens when we smooth it. And that's way too smooth. So we need to put in some controlling edges to control where the smooth happens. So at the moment we've got just this edge. So you see this will smooth all the way down. If we come in and use the multi-cut to put sort of a controlling edge here and a controlling edge here, and then one here and one here, and I'm going to need a couple on the underside too, so one here and one here. Now when we smooth, we'll keep a lot more of the object's shape. Okay, so we keep a lot more of that hard edge. Now making those controlling edges further away from the edge, let me just go back to 1. So if I was to move this edge, yeah, if I was to slide that edge this way, then my surface would get bigger. My bend, my smoothness, if you like, the overall smoothing effect. Again, so you will have an impact when you put those controlling edges in. I'm also going to put a edge around the inside here. Okay, like so, to stop that collapsing and giving me a nice sharper edge around here. So that's looking pretty good to me. This is a very simple thing to actually model. Just a few different techniques here, and we smoothed this down quite nicely. Now before I put feet on it, I want to get it to the correct dimensions and just make sure that it looks, you know, decent with my tree. Okay, so let's hide the leaves here. Alright, so what sort of size would we be looking at? It's going to have to be bigger than that. That's not even fitting our root structure in. So I think about that size would be kind of good. Let's take the main roots and the main tree geo and the ground and our rock, which is just called cube at the moment. Okay, they're not grouped together, so they're going to move in completely different orders. Let's just move this up first, then let's move the ground so we've got some reference here. And we would want this ground plane, you know, pretty much on top here, because bonsai trees tend to sit right at the top of the pot with a mound of soil, or at least the ones I've seen online. As I've said before, I am most definitely not a bonsai tree expert. So we'd need to shape this up a bit to fit in the pot, but for right now, just for our testing purposes, let's get the tree and the roots and put those towards the ground. I want the tree too. There we go. Done like so. So slightly partially bisecting the ground, some of those going in. Alright, and our rock, which was cube. Okay, so let's get this back into place. Actually, that looked about right, as luck would have it. Okay, now how is our pot looking? Our pot is looking quite ginormous, really. Yeah, that pot is way, way, way too big. So let's come in and scale it down this way. And this way. We're going to have to just clip those roots in there. And that's a better size for it. That pot was just ridiculously large. Okay, get the ground in there. Alright, so we know now we don't actually need this ground. We'll put another ground in a second. And that pot is about the right size and shape for this particular model. Now we got to put the feet on and the ground, which will sculpt out a little bit to just give it a kind of mounded feel on top. But for right now, that's kind of the start of our pot. And my mouse here is playing up a little bit, so I'm going to stop this part here and I will come back in a second and put the feet on after I've had time to beat my mouse. So I will see you in the next part. Thank you very much for watching, and that will be the final one. Cheers. Okay, welcome back. Sorry about that, folks. Had to cut that last part a little short, but two cats and an optical mouse does not always make for a happy marriage. So let's put the topsoil on here, and we can do this by using the shape of the bottom of the pot. So I'm clicking, holding shift and double clicking next to it just to select the entire edge loop. So we're going to extract these faces and make them into topsoil. Select the last ones. There we go. They won't select as a single edge loop because there's a whacking great big pole in the middle of them, but no hassle. So edit mesh and duplicate. Let's see where have you gone to. There you are. Duplicate. Alright, you'll see it's not the smoothing off, but that has now, if we modify and center the pivot there, you can pull this up and it should be pretty much a perfect fit. It needs to be scaled a bit. Problem is there's a big dip in it. So we could try scaling that flat, but because it's a sphere, it's just going to do this. So an easy way to do this and an easy way to flatten any surface is to just select the verts and scale them towards the plane that you want them to be flattened on. And you'll get to a point where I'm clicking and dragging this down and it's not going. It just means all of the faces here now are perfectly flat, which is what we want. So let's push this down until we are at the point where we need to be and scale it up just a little bit so it's bisecting the pot there but not coming through. There. So now we have the perfect fitting top layer to start either sculpting out our soil on, doing texturing for our soil, maybe putting a little moss on, whatever you need to do really. Now let's smooth this and smooth this. Make sure it all fits together without coming out the edges. It does. Now one thing I notice about this pot is it's possibly too round on the bottom and it's maybe even a little too big still. So let's group these two things. So Control G to group, and did that group, do group, yeah, there we go. And I'm going to just make it a bit smaller this way and maybe even a bit smaller this way. Again, this is going to come down to what you need it for. I want mine to be a prop in a set I'm doing, so you know, I want to make it as small as I possibly can while still having it look good. So there we go. And it's a bit rounded on the bottom and also a bit tall. And again, we can unround that by scaling these verts towards each other and then make it a bit shallower by just moving that up like so. Okay, so get a size that you're happy with. That makes me happy. That particular size, and now we just need some feet for this. Now the feet for it are not quite as simple as they might seem because we're dealing with a round dish, so we'll need round feet. There's a fairly easy way to do this. Let's create a cube here and let's just make it so we can have a look at it and get it to about the right size. So scale it up a bit, scale it out, and let's compare that to our pot here. Let's see what sort of size feet we would like. Now, so kind of that size I'm thinking, maybe a trifle taller. and a bit narrower, but we're going to need the length, actually thinking about it, because it's going to be wrapped around in a circular type pattern, and a little bit thicker than that. Just got a nice big thick feet on this thing. Okay, so now we need to bend this. But if we try and bend it now, there's no geometry to bend. So let's go to the channel box and cube, and let's just do 10 and 10, which should be more than enough for a nice bend. So bending. Now we could do our old trick of selecting these verts, grabbing the soft selection brush and getting it towards the middle and sort of trying then to bend it. You can see that's kind of working. I could do a rotate there and I get a shorter bend. However, that's a bit hit or miss. It's fine for a sort of a free-flowing organic shape like a tree root, but something that you want to be an exact bend, like something a potter had made or some mechanical component, well, we want something a bit more precise. So I am going to use a bend deformer. Now I'll come up to the animation menu and get a deform nonlinear bend. Okay, now this is where it will bend. So at the moment this is pointing entirely the wrong direction. So I'm going to put it onto rotate, hold J to lock it into place, and snap it -90 in this case. Now attribute editor, bend, and now we can change the curvature in the bend and get the curvature of our foot. There we go. We can even curve it into a full circle at this point. Now, in order for me to take a look at this, I'm going to group the bend deformer and the foot. If I don't, and I try and move one without the other, well, I'll just show you what happens. You can see that the bend deformer has some influence on this, especially if we pick up and move the bend deformer. So if we didn't group them together, they would move independently, and all sorts of weirdness would happen. So let's grab the cube in the bend handle and Control G. We'll just call this foot. And I'll call that foot 01. And now, before I do anything else, I'm going to center the pivot for the group. So modify center pivot. There we go. And let's come in here and bend this, get it to where we want it on the actual dish itself. So where do we want our feet? About here, I would think. Let's look at this from the front view. So we're going to want the foot to be about here. Now, whoops, I've grabbed the center handle, not what I wanted. And now we can see how extreme a bend we would like on it. Move this into place. So let's get it there. And we're going to try and match the bend of the actual pot. So, which we're not doing at the moment, if you can see. But we can come into our bend handle and bend and add more curvature until we match the bend of the pot. Which would be about there, I think. Let's just rotate that. Okay, how's that looking? Yeah, that's bending like the pot. Now I would like to shape it up a bit because it's a bit boring. So this time we will go to vertex, and this time we're going to have to use a proper orthographic view because I just want to grab these ones down the bottom and scale inwards, and that should give us a nice tapered foot look, which it does. So happy with that. Now you might need to change the influence of your brush, so B and middle mouse button. I think we've done that enough by now. And I want to put a lip on it. So face, select this one, this one, this one, and this one. Hit B to turn off soft selection. That should have grabbed those top two faces. Now I'm just going to do an extrusion, modeling toolkit, extrude, so from the center, or you can just indeed go thickness here, middle mouse button and drag. So let's give us some thickness, and I've got 20 divisions. I'm going to have to reset that in my preferences. At some point I was obviously modeling something with a lot of divisions, and then I can just drag this back, make sure it's bisected here, smooth it with 3, and get it into position so it's looking like the foot for my pot. And there we go, 1 foot for the pot. Now we just need to duplicate this 4 times, of course. So let's duplicate the whole group. So control 1, 2, 3, and 4. And as we name this 0, 1, you'll just get 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4. So let's select all those, and then select the pot itself, and get a show, isolate selected, view selected, And then we'll do this probably in the top view. So isolate selected, view selected, and in the top view we'll be able to see our feet. Okay, let me get rid of the grid here. And okay, what has gone on with my top view X-ray? Okay, that's fine. Right, so now we've got these feet put into position. So I'm just going to rotate them around and bring them into position, just basically like so. Now you could be a little more accurate, take a little more time with it. But for me, you know, this is going to be a sort of organic-y pot, so if it's a little out, I'm sure we can be forgiven. Okay, and let's just take the other two. Now, one from here, and let's throw it up there. So I would think that would be about right. As I say, it's an old flower pot, you know, probably wasn't done on any sort of high-tech machinery, especially after we've textured it and made it look a bit crusty. We're not going to need perfect alignment. Okay, so that looks about right to me. Let's have a look how that looks on our pot. Pretty decent, really. Okay, so that is our simple pot. Let's bring everything else back. So show, isolate, selected, view selected, and that brings everything else back. Now, we'll just do a little bit of tidying up. We no longer need any of the bend deformers on these. In fact, I should have done this before I duplicated, but it's not really a problem. We should edit, delete by type. Now you see you've got all the history or non-deformer history. We're going to do all the history, and that got rid of the one bend deformer. Edit, delete by type history. Okay, so that bend deformer is obviously not applied to that. It's not. Let's make sure we get them all done, and we should be looking pretty good. Okay, we're a bit wonky on the spacing on the back there. Oh yeah, that one's way out. Okay, but from this angle, yeah, we're about there. Okay, so there's our feet. Now, we're going to talk about our soil for a minute, because I want it a bit higher up than this. I would say it should be about here in the pot, which is cutting into my rock a little bit too much, or is it actually? And also we've got a bit of bisection of the rock through the flower pot, and I don't just want to chop that off, so I'm going to go back to the sculpting tools and let's just scrape it off so it's not coming through there. There we go. Let's make sure we have big bit there. There we go, bye. And we haven't got anything else bisecting the pot, have we? What's that there? That looks like a tree root. That's because that is a tree root. Okay, so let's select some faces here. Obviously our pot is a little small to contain all of our roots. Let's just get rid of that. And let's select a face there. And I'm just pressing Shift and the greater than sign to select up to the end of the root and hit delete. Okay, now you can come in, and if there is some bisection here, you know, if you wanted to take the time and trouble, which I probably will at some point, just grab the end of these and give them a little bend so it looks like they're laying next to the side of the pot rather than growing into it. Okay, and that is us about done. So let me bring back the paint effects leaves here. Sorry, not the paint effects leaves, the main geometry leaves. So Shift H, and let's bring back a ground for the pot to sit on, because it's always kind of difficult to see what you're doing without a proper ground plane. Okay, So that would be our feet there. Job, as they say, is a good one. And I'm going to turn on two-sided lighting so I don't get that nasty effect on the leaves. And we are just about done. In fact, we are done. So in chapter 2, we're going to look at things like detailing the soil here, because it's a bit flat at the moment. You know, you'd expect some roughness, some little rocks, some pebbles maybe around the outside, some moss and that sort of stuff. We're all going to look at high detail texturing for something like this. Sorry, not texturing, but high detailed displacement work for something like this. And the same with the trunk. We are actually going to put knots on the trunk. We're going to sculpt in actual bark-like structures, and we're basically going to take this from a piece of set dressing, which it is now. You know, a thing you'd see from this far away on a bookshelf, maybe. We're going to take it and turn it into more of a hero object, a thing that would be front and center stage. So that will be realistically a tutorial done mostly in Mudbox, where I will be looking at surface detailing with Mudbox. And just before we get into that, the second chapter, I want to take this object, because this ground is a bit too flat. I can't really leave it like this at the end. So we're going to take the geo here and also our rock. Let's just select that. And no, it's all going to move at different speeds, so I'm going to group it. And we're going to pull it up. And I'm just going to look at this ground quickly. So again, this would be a job that I would sculpt in. But you can do some basic sculpting in Maya, should you so choose. But for right now, I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to hit the soft selection. I'm going to make a fairly big brush, and I'm going to make a bigger brush than that actually. Let's make a bigger brush. So B and middle mouse drag, get everything. And I'm going to pull this up because you very rarely see one of these bonsai trees sitting on a completely piece of flat ground. They tend to, for whatever reason, probably the root build up underneath, but the soil tends to be, you know, not flat. It tends to be sort of mounded up towards where the tree is. So let's take group 3 and just move this back down till we hit an appropriate destination with it. And that mounding is way too high there. So we would again have to try this once again, vertex, and just pull it down. Maybe we've got way too much of a mound in the middle there. Yeah, I just don't want it to be completely flat, to be honest. There we go. Okay, let me just unselect these objects and have a look what that looks like. So at the back here, I'm going to raise it up a bit. So vertex once again, and let's select one from, and probably easier to go on the inside for this. Oh no, because I'm going to have to isolate it. So show, isolate, selected, view selected, and I'll just grab a vertex here and start pushing down a little bit at the back. Again, it's more of a job for sculpting, but I just don't want to leave it completely flat, to be honest. So shading, show, isolate, selected, view selected. And the reason we had that jagged cut there is because when we did that, we had the faces selected, so I'd actually isolated those. Now we're cutting in a little bit to our rock, but that is of no importance to us because that's where it ended for this anyway. Okay, so now we have just a small bump in it. Now I will finish this part, and indeed this whole chapter here. I'm going to take, because we didn't work on the textures of this at all, we're going to do that in the next part with painting techniques for textures along with surface detailing. I will do black and white ambient occlusion render of this now, and that's what you'll see on the promotion for it. So I'm guessing that you know, that's what you looked at that decided you made to want to watch it. And I'll come back in a moment and show you those renders before we completely finish this part. So I'll see you in a second. So I've gone ahead and done a couple of test renders. Now I did end up making one tweak, which was I just shrunk the size of this pot ever so slightly. Because it was too big when I started to test render, and I've also put just a bent plane in the background with a ramp shader on it. Nothing special here, so just a ramp connected to the diffuse. So just a circular ramp with black and white scale, or grey and white in this case, just to give me that dot in the background to make the renders look a bit nicer. Now I also did tweak this root ever so slightly, basically using exactly the same techniques we went into before. I just pulled it a little bit higher up because it looked a bit flat before, so I just went in and grabbed the edge with the soft selection turned on and pulled that up. And that was the only changes I've made since we did the test render. So then I just left the lights the same, left everything the same. I actually took the texture off the leaves and just kept the opacity because we didn't go into creating the texture. We'll get into texturing in the next part, in the next chapter. I decided it was much more fair to show you a representation of what we would actually be making, which is, you know, at this point, this tree. Now the UVs are all done for this because they came from Paint Effects. So as I mentioned, if you wanted to, you can throw a texture on this and it will look fantastic from sort of that distance. But if you wanted a, you know, a really close-up shot of this and you need some detailing in your bark, again, that's something we'll be covering in the next chapter. It's not going to be necessary for all of you. If you are just doing a bit of set dressing, then this is pretty much where you'd leave it. Throw on a bark texture, throw on the leaf texture, and you're good to go. Terracotta for the pot, or however you decide to do that. So I'm going to pull the renders up here. So this is the test render. Now it looks better with a smaller pot. Obviously I've got to adjust the feet down here. I missed that when I was doing the render, and pretty good. This is exactly what I was aiming for when we started. Little bonsai tree in a pot that can go on a bookshelf and become part of some set dressing, some very nice set dressing in this case, I think. So I did a couple of other renders. You'll see here we have much larger leaves. In order to achieve this, I just used the different cutout opacity image. So I literally went into Photoshop, cut round a leaf and threw it on, and you can see we've now got a different leaf image in comparison to this much smaller one. Now for me, I'm preferring these smaller leaves at the moment, but you know, you may vary, may need different style of leaves. And here's a close-up of the larger leaves. So you can see we've just got some bigger leaves there. I'm not quite sure what tree they were from. I shot them a while ago. So, and again, different angle on the roots. Roots now looking really nice. The rock, bump map on it, you're done from a distance. No need for displacement. Same with the trunk, bump map, basic texture from a distance. You're absolutely done. So again, the bigger leaves, because we didn't see much of those, and the bigger leaves from a distance. So I'll leave both of the cutout opacity maps for the leaves in with this tutorial, and yeah, for a piece of set dressing this would be fantastic. For a close-up hero image, for instance, if this was going to be all of your image, so if this was your final shot and you wanted it from this close, then you would need to really look at going in and texturing in some detail, sculpting in some detail on the trunk, putting a few knots on. You know, you would need to look at much higher resolution textures than just throwing the standard trunk material on here. And you would need to look at retopology for some of this stuff so it didn't explode when you put displacement on it. I'm going to cover all that in chapter 2. For some of you, this will be as far as you'll need to go. If you want to create a more hero-based object, i.e. one that's right in your face, join me for chapter 2. We'll look at sculpting in Mudbox, surface detailing, exporting displacement maps, normal maps. We'll look at retopology for roots. We'll look at painting textures, quickly doing UVs so we can get much better control over said textures, all that kind of stuff that you'd need if you were working on a hero image as opposed to a piece of set dressing. So I very much hope you've enjoyed this one. It was fun to make, and I really hope you get something out of it. If you've got any questions, you can reach me, david@SimplyMaya.com, or of course you can post in our forum and ask questions there. We're all happy to help. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in chapter 2.